Chapter 166. The originally peaceful underground base began to stir restlessly. Due to the detection of the energy waves from Silen's gunshot, the dormant defense system of the base was activated, and the stagnant power system also began to operate. There were already lights in many places, but they were all warning lights. A mechanical voice sounded. External threat detected, please enter password. F***CK. Why is there such a thing as a password? Lung yelled. Password incorrect, please enter again. Lung fell silent and looked at Silen. Silen made an I don't know expression. They didn't expect that the defense system of a base that had been buried underground for so many years wouldn't be completely crippled. After a moment of silence, the mechanical voice sounded again. Once again, external threat detected, please enter password. Silen looked at Huimao, who was squatting there in a daze. Lung was fiddling with an instrument in his hand, but didn't say anything. The mechanical voice sounded for the third time. No valid password available, commencing terminal command. Terminal command? What terminal command? Lung asked. Silen suddenly recalled that laboratory under that slum town. If all these crazy researchers were like that, then that meant, hurry and leave, the base's self-destruct sequence has been activated. Silen dragged Lung and Huimao outside. Self-destruct? F***CK, how could I bear to do that? Lung complained as he ran. Less nonsense, hurry and leave, I don't want to become a fossil. Silen rushed in front. I don't want to either. The two men and a cat rushed back the way they came, but the tunnel they came from was already closed. Lung brought up the scanned map of the base, and prepared to look for another tunnel. There's no time, have your robots dig. Silen yelled. But this isn't the entrance, the wall is too hard, digging through it will take a lot of time, and using too much energy will cause the base to collapse. Lung said as he gave the digging robots an order, and it was just as he said. Because this underground base was a bit more complicated, Lung didn't bring many robots, only the ones to scout and dig. When the small digging robot was folded, it looked like a frisbee. When digging, it would unfold a few metal pieces to form a certain angle like a drill bit and drill through the obstacles in front of it. However, it was obvious that a lot of effort had been put into this underground base. The walls that were not connected to the passageways were all reinforced with multiple layers. If they wanted to drill through, they would have to use high-energy light beams. However, time waited for no one. Looking at the digging robot's results, Silen said to Huimao, Wheeze, go. Be the vanguard. Then, Lung watched as the cat drilled a hole through the multi-layered reinforced wall that his own robot was laboriously using its advanced cutting beam to bore a hole in 2 seconds. With this hole, it would be much easier to expand the hole. Huimao took the lead to open the hole, and the digging robot worked hard to expand the hole behind it. Silen Helong climbed up the hole. What is that sound? Lung asked. Desertification. Damn it. Although Lung didn't think he was good at math, he could still calculate that at this rate, they would definitely be turned into sand in 10 seconds. The good thing was that there weren't that many reinforced walls here. After breaking through the walls, the rock and soil outside would move much faster. The rustling sound behind them was even more dangerous than a rattlesnake. 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds, we can get out. The moment they rushed out of the ground, the two quickly used their hoverboards and jumped up. Silen picked up Huimao, and then stepped on the hoverboard and flew into the distance. The second the two left the ground, the hole they rushed out of had already been turned into sand, and the range of the sand was still expanding. Scared me to death. Damn this underground base, so dangerous. Before Lung could finish venting his emotions, there was a loud boom. The expanding wave of air directly sent the two hoverboards that hadn't flown too far into the air flying far away. Bang bang. Silen Helong fell to the ground one after another. Pay. Lung spat out the sand in his mouth. Right now, he didn't have the time to complain. His mouth was full of sand. The two of them were covered in dust and sand, and they were in a sorry state. Those lunatics are really ruthless. I always thought they would keep this base and visit it again when they have the chance. I didn't expect them to directly turn it into sand, and even cause a huge explosion. Sillin shot a glance at Lung. To think that this guy could still talk so energetically at a time like this. Recalling the scene he saw in the base, where the experimental subjects were kept, the last few cages were empty. In other words, the important experimental subjects had already been moved or escaped long ago. The remaining ones were all abandoned and didn't have the ability to escape. As for the most precious experimental subjects, the researchers wouldn't let their results go to waste. How could they leave behind the things they had researched with so much difficulty? F***ck, there's too little time. I didn't have the time to get any information at all. Lung looked at the information displayed in his hand and said regretfully. When the defense system was activated, the device in Lung's hand took the opportunity to hack into the system to steal useful information. However, the results weren't good. Sillin leaned to the side and held up Huemao's cat head. The cat's eyes clearly flashed. Tsk, he still doesn't know how to lie. Sillin raised his eyelids and didn't look at Huemao anymore. It seemed that when the defense system and other propulsion systems were automatically activated, Huemao also took the opportunity to hack into those systems and steal some information. Moreover, he gained quite a bit, much faster than Lung's device. However, the information he obtained was quite a blow to Huemao. Using animals and humans to carry out molecular biochemical experiments was too horrifying for Huemao. Sillin stood up, kicked off the sand all over his body, and then sat on the ground with his legs spread out, patting the device and sighing. Let's go. Don't sit here anymore. Who knows, there might be some follow-up trouble. Looks like there's nothing else. Then let's return to the starship directly. Lung pulled up the information sent by the various robots. A few important sampling points had already been taken care of. Some of the fossils had been selectively excavated, and there was enough space on the spaceplane to store these things. Sillin nodded. However, after taking a few steps, Sillin stopped again. He saw Huemao looking around. What's the matter? Sillin asked. Something is watching us. Huemao looked in a certain direction. It was normal for there to be some beasts around them. As long as they didn't attack them, they wouldn't deliberately hunt them. Most of these beasts were modified creatures. Their primeval genes had long been modified, so strictly speaking, they didn't qualify as food. That was why Sillin Helong didn't have any plans to actively hunt them for now. However, when Sillin followed the direction Huemao was looking at, he saw a small half of a face. Yes, a face. It was a young face. It didn't look much different from a human, except that its face was covered in dust, so its original appearance couldn't be seen clearly. The tuft of red hair on its head was very eye-catching. Lung also saw it now. That fellow was hiding behind a rock on a short mountain not too far away, only revealing the upper half of its face. Its eyes were filled with curiosity. Seeing 3 pairs of eyes looking at it, the fellow hiding behind the rock shrunk its head with a whoosh, but it peeked out again a few seconds later. Hey little fellow, where did you come from? Sillin asked. Seemingly sensing that the owner of these 3 pairs of eyes didn't have any ill intentions, the fellow slowly walked out. It should be considered as walking. It walked out on all 4s. Its ears were pointed and there was hair at the edge. Behind it, there was a tail that was wagging, indicating that it didn't have any ill intentions. Sillin Helong looked at each other. Helgard dog. However, how could there be such a small one? Could it be that it was born from those Helgard dogs that were abandoned here? One had to know that those with excellent genes were all taken away by the research institute when they left. Those that were left behind were of slightly lower quality. However, looking at this little fellow, from the perspective of a test subject, it seemed to be a success. It was like how humans with B and B genes gave birth to an A gene baby. There were some injuries on this little fellow's body. The wounds were very fresh, and they were still bleeding. Looking at the sand on them, it should have been caused by the explosion earlier. Scylla took out a bag of jerky, tore a small opening, and tossed it over. If he walked over directly, this little fellow would definitely run away. Suddenly, an unknown object was tossed over. The little fellow trembled and took a few steps back. However, it was quickly attracted by the aroma of the jerky. It carefully went over and sniffed it. Feeling that there was no problem, it ate the unopened bag of jerky. Looking at this little fellow that should be 6 or 7 years old by human standards, directly chewing the whole bag of jerky and swallowing it, Long suddenly felt a little tight in his throat. What kind of monstrous structure was this fellow's esophagus made of? After eating the jerky, the little fellow licked its mouth. It seemed that it hadn't had enough. It looked at Scylla with bright eyes and wagged its tail behind it even more than before. Scylla was about to throw another bag of jerky to it, but the little fellow's eyes suddenly changed from innocent and harmless to full of murderous intent. At that moment, even Scylla could clearly feel that strong murderous intent. Puff! The little fellow stretched out its claws that were more than 10 centimeters long, and with a kick, it rushed in one direction. Using both its hands and feet to run like a wild beast, it even let out a low growl from its throat. At this moment, it was truly the guard dog of this hell. Long brought up the image captured by the aerial detector. In the image, this little fellow was charging towards a ferocious beast that was more than 10 meters tall that looked like a lion. Its speed and ferocity were completely different from before. This is a Cerberus. Even if it's just a young one, they're still quite friendly towards creatures other than prey. They won't take the initiative to attack. They'll only act like this when they're facing prey. Long sighed. My old man once said that Cerberus is a type of slave that's deeply engraved into their genes. Regardless of whether it's them or their descendants, they're completely enslaved. They'll always remember what their master says, and will never think for themselves. Even if they still look like humans, their humanity has already disappeared. Cerberus. Even if they were their descendants, that command was implanted into their very bones. It was like a kind of innate nature. They would completely copy a certain memory of the previous generation and remember the scent of the prey that needed to be hunted. The scent originated from the prey's genes, and they would hunt for their entire lives from birth to death. Let's go. Long patted Scylla's shoulder. This planet is just one example of the entire Sector S. There are thousands of similar planets, and it's not just Sector S. In fact, other sectors have similar situations as well. There are plenty of places where such experiments are conducted. Of course Scylla knew what Long was talking about. Wasn't that the underground research lab on planet Brown Earth? It was a place that no one knew about for decades, and if Scylla hadn't accidentally barged into it, it would still be as dark as ever. Long couldn't be bothered to collect the samples himself, so the robots he sent out had already taken care of everything. Lakes and other places with abundant water sources were especially important areas. When Scylla arrived at the spaceplane on a hoverboard, the robots Long sent out were moving the collected items onto the spaceplane. They had also given some of the large skeletons very good care, and they were much more reliable than Long himself. This was probably one of the reasons his father had sent so many robots to accompany him. It's windy. Long looked at the gray sky. There might be a storm coming for a place like this. Let's hurry up and leave. I don't want to experience a hell storm. Long sat inside the spaceplane's control room and ordered the robots to move faster. He was waiting for the last few samples to be moved onto the spaceplane before taking off immediately. Scylla stood outside the spaceplane. He didn't stay inside the control room like everyone else. Looking down from here, he could see the changes in the area. The changes during the early stages of a storm, the air pressure and humidity were all obvious. The animals were beginning to feel uneasy and were looking for shelter. Suddenly, a small shadow appeared in Scylla's vision. It wasn't as lively as before, and its speed was much slower. There were wounds all over its body. One of its hind legs was bent and propped on the ground. Both of its arms were also injured to varying degrees. It was trembling and unstable when it supported itself on the ground. Just like that, it limped over to Silen's side. Its tail drooped behind it, making it look very pitiful. "Silen, let's go!" Long shouted from inside the spaceplane. After moving everything, Long couldn't wait to leave this place. Staying here made him feel uncomfortable all over. Huimao moved forward a bit and said hesitantly, "Should I help him?" Silen shook his head. "Don't go over there." He turned to look at the small figure and stretched out his hand. He opened his fingers and shouted, "I'll count to 5. If you can come over by then, I'll take you away." Silen felt that the little guy could understand what he meant. According to Celine's calculations, the little fellow would be able to arrive just in time. If there was even the slightest bit of hesitation and he couldn't arrive on time, then Celine would definitely turn around and leave. However, what was worth celebrating was that after Silen finished speaking, the little guy sped up his pace. His eyes were bright. Behind him, the blood that flowed out from his wounds dripped all over the ground. Very soon, it was covered by the dust blown by the wind. The little figure swayed left and right in the wind, but his steps were very firm. He walked straight in this direction without slowing down at all. Long looked at the scene outside through the screen on the spaceplane. He adjusted the image captured by the detector. The lion-like beast that the little guy had rushed over to hunt earlier had already had a thick layer of flesh torn off and was lying there silently. It was being used as a delicious meal by other weaker carnivores before the storm. That's right, as long as the hellhound moved out, it would either die or its prey would die. Long used his hand to measure the little figure displayed on the screen. So small. But why would the little guy chase after him? However, looking at the little guy's injuries, if no one helped him, coupled with this storm, he probably wouldn't be able to make it through. The little guy watched as Silen's 5 fingers turned into 4, then 3, 2, faster, faster. Even an adult would find it hard to make it through such injuries, right? When Silen put down the last finger, the little guy fell to the ground in front of Silen, but there was a smile on his face, revealing 2 sharp teeth. Carrying the little guy, Silen and Huimao jumped onto the spaceplane. "Hurry up and leave, the storm is coming." "Hurry your sister, now you know to hurry up?" Long signaled for the robot to take off and leave quickly. As the spaceplane flew higher and higher, the scenery on the ground began to be covered by the gray color again. However, the ring of the storm was very obvious. After rushing out of the planet, looking at the lightning and thunder in the gray clouds below, Long called up the image captured by the detector that had yet to fly out. Hell on earth, no, it was hell within hell. Strong winds and torrential rain, the earth shook and the mountains swayed. A giant tornado that spiraled down from the sky tore apart a standing mountain, and at this time, the earth's crust actually began to move. Only those who survived such a disaster were worthy of admiration. Whether it was those seemingly weak animals or those huge ferocious beasts, the ones who survived were the strong ones, the winners. There was no right or wrong in survival. When they were on the spaceplane, Silen simply treated the little guy's wounds, and when they returned to the starship, he began to nurse the little guy again. After all, the starship had a more complete set of medicines. However, looking at the little guy's recovery, he could survive with just a little strength. After treating the wound, he gave the little guy an injection of nutrient solution, and then let the little guy rest here. As long as the nutrients kept up with this animal's physique, he would probably recover very quickly. The little guy was lying on his side on the sickbed, his broken leg still unable to move after being repaired. At this time, the little guy was bending his arms and resting his head on them, his eyes looking around. Huimao, who was walking back and forth in front of him, attracted the little guy's attention. After walking around the little guy on the sickbed twice, Huimao went up to sniff and shook his beard. "It smells like a dog." The little guy whimpered twice, but it was unknown if he understood. Perhaps because he was too tired. Now that he relaxed, the little guy quickly fell asleep. Seeing this, Huimao also yawned, raised his paw to scoop up the little guy's fluffy tail, made a circle around him, and closed his eyes to sleep. When Silen finished treating the little guy's wounds and returned to the control room, Lung was frowning as he stared straight at the screen. Seeing Silen enter, Lung raised his eyes and glanced at him. "It's done." "Yeah. What the hell are you looking at?" Silen pointed at the screen full of garbled codes. "I intercepted a transmission code just now. It's made up of secret codes. The analysis system couldn't decipher anything, but this screen is full of garbled code. It's giving me a headache. Bring out the original code, let me try." Lung gave up his seat, restored the transmission code, and stood at the side expectantly. 5 minutes later, Silen Helong looked at the large butterfly image on the screen, and fell silent. Chapter 167. Although he had not managed to decipher the correct password, the results he had obtained up to this point had given him a general direction. Lon Hudi. This was the first time Silen had come into contact with anything related to Lon Hudi. A blue butterfly flapped its wings on the screen, and the symbols that formed this butterfly were the information contained in the original code. No wonder the system couldn't decipher it. It's Lon Hudi's information. Lung sighed. The decryption system he had brought with him was the latest one developed by the Andryra family, but Lon Hudi's was a bit special. This was because he knew too little about Lon Hudi and did not understand their communication. Lon Hudi was a special kind of person, and it was very difficult for non-members of Lon Hudi's hunter group to have a deep understanding of them. Even the core members of the other 3 hunter groups did not have the confidence to recognize even 1/10 of the core members of Lon Hudi. This was because the people of Lon Hudi had no names, only code names. If the person with the code name died, the next person would take over. For example, the code name of Lon Hudi's leader was Lon Hudi, and all the people who had been leaders of Lon Hudi were called Lon Hudi. As for their real names, basically no one knew, or those who did were already dead. "Hey, Silen, is there really no way to decrypt it further?" Lung looked at the blue butterfly on the screen and said unwillingly, "I haven't heard any news about Lon Hudi for so many years, and suddenly seeing this image makes me very excited. I'll try, but this encrypted message is really troublesome. Even if we decrypt it further, we might not be able to get a definite conclusion." 10 minutes later, the symbols that formed the blue butterfly on the screen had become 1024 dots. From afar, it still looked like a blue butterfly, but the base had changed. Silen rubbed the space between his eyebrows and pointed at the image of the butterfly on the screen. He said, "This is as far as we can go. This is the final decoding result, but we don't know which point represents the real information. In reality, the information contained in each point is complete, but it's just a cover for the real information." "You mean, out of these 1024 messages, only one of them is real? Then what should we do? Read every single message?" Lung felt that his vision was a little blurry. "That's what I mean." Silen flexed his fingers and unlocked all 1024 messages. One message after another flashed across the screen, and when he was done reading all of them, Silen put a hand to his forehead. "They're probably using code words, so I don't know which message is real. I can't filter them out." Lung opened his mouth. Not only did they use over 1,000 messages as a cover, they even had a code word? In this way, there was really no way to know the content of Lon Hudi's message. Silen couldn't do anything about it. He knew too little about Lon Hudi. He didn't know their usual code words, wording, and grammar, so even if he could decipher these codes, he wouldn't be able to get any accurate information. Although I don't know what Lon Hudi is trying to convey with this message, since they've already started sending the message, it means that they've already started taking action. Pay attention to the recent media report. There should be something related happening. The media at Sector S won't report the truth at all. Lung moved on a control panel beside him. There are a few electronic publications in the League of Stars that pay attention to this, but they won't be very efficient. We can only rely on internal information. What Lung pulled out was the Andryra family's own intelligence network. Lung shared this intelligence network with the other family members who came to Sector S in advance, and they would also report the latest information to their superiors. There's only some messy and unimportant information, and they're all below Grade 3 prisons. There's not a single piece of information on the important places in Grade 4 and 5 prisons. Lung flipped through the information on the intelligence network and said, since all parties have started taking action since a long time ago, but there's still no movement from the Grade 4 and 5 prisons. This means that all parties are very secretive about their actions. After all, the people they sent over are all elite. Maybe some of the people in the Grade 4 and 5 prisons have been switched out without them even knowing. I remember that the purpose of the people they sent over is to ensure that those important missions can leave the prison safely, right? If that's the case, then there's no need for them to break out of the prison. Silen said. Some people will switch out the people inside just to be safe. After all kinds of possibilities can happen inside a prison, especially in dangerous places like Grade 4 and 5 prisons. You know, if we use the standards of you hunters to measure the people guarding those places, the weakest among them is at least at the level of a captain. Moreover, the people they sent over are also capable of assassinating people other than rescuing people. Silen let out a long sigh. Yes, those experts are all lying in wait, true experts. A storm is coming. Never mind, let's not think about these things. When the riot breaks out, we'll seize the opportunity to set a few fires during the chaos and provoke the guards of Sector S. Lung wasn't as emotional as he was. His goal in coming here wasn't to clash head-on with those monsters, and since the old man said that he wasn't strong enough yet, then he would wait and see just how strong those powerful people really were. Hey, how's that puppy? Lung asked. It's sleeping, I guess. Its wounds are healing pretty fast. Are you really going to bring that little guy with you? Speaking of which, that little guy is pretty special. Logically speaking, a Cerberus won't leave that planet. After all, they haven't completed the order they must obey for the rest of their lives. If he's like the other Cerberus, then I wouldn't have brought him with me. A one-track-minded Cerberus was a burden to him as well. As a hunter, an extra burden meant an extra danger. Who would risk their own life for no reason? Lung nodded in agreement. That little guy has the fierceness of a Cerberus, and he's pretty strong as well. However, he's more self-aware than a Cerberus, and not as inflexible. If you can rope him into the team, your 6th Division will gain yet another great helper. That depends on his choice. What choice? It depends on whether he chooses to be a dog or a man. Lung was silent for a moment before he got up and walked outside. Let's see what kind that little guy belongs to. When he arrived at the infirmary, Silen Helong was speechless when he saw the two fellows on the sickbed. Hui Mao had pushed the little guy to the corner of the sickbed and was holding onto its tail. He was lying there with his limbs spread out, and one of his hind legs was still on the little guy's face. He had no image at all. Since when did this cat's sleeping posture become so bad? Lung hurriedly took a picture of this scene. It was rare to see a sleeping posture worse than him. He who stays with ink will be stained black. Perhaps it had been woken up by Hui Mao's kicks. When the little guy saw someone coming, it opened its eyes and looked at Silen pitifully. Just as it was about to swing its tail, it remembered that it was being held by Hui Mao. So it gave up. Hey, this little guy's eyes are green. Lung moved closer to take a look and exclaimed, I remember that all the Cerberus researched by the base have red eyes. When I first saw it, I was lamenting that those researchers specifically chose Cerberus with red eyes. It's probably a mutation. Perhaps one of its parents had the related recessive gene, but it was expressed in its body in the end. Silen checked on the little guy's condition. It was indeed recovering well. How long had it been? The wounds had already scabbed, and the broken leg had also healed quite well. It's recovering well, but it still needs a good rest. Sillin rubbed the little guy's head and lifted Huimao to free the little guy's tail. He moved the little guy to the center of the sickbed. Have a good sleep. When you wake up, we'll have a feast. After setting the infirmary to sleep mode, Sillin carried Huimao and Lung out of the infirmary. How is it? Sillin asked Lung. It feels different from the other Cerberus. It might really work. Lung touched his chin and said, I'll go back and rest for a while. Call me if anything happens. Okay. After Sillin returned to the infirmary, he flicked Huimao's ear. Alright, stop pretending to sleep. Your whiskers are all curled up. When Sillin Helong entered the infirmary just now, Huimao would have been fine. It was impossible that he didn't want to move. Hearing Sillin's words, Huimao opened his eyes. He appeared listless. I didn't sleep well. I can see that. I don't usually see you sleeping like that. Did you have a nightmare? Sillin scratched Huimao's chin. Huimao rubbed his head and narrowed his eyes. I don't want to be caught by those researchers. A captured research subject was too pitiful. The information that Huimao had obtained from the base's system was like watching a real-life horror movie. That's why I said we need to become stronger. No matter how strong you guys are, you can't be stronger than me. In less than 3 sentences, Huimao's prideful nature was revealed. That's not necessarily true. The strong ones haven't shown themselves yet. How strong? I don't know, on a grade 3 prison planet in Sector S. Inside a prison that looked like a stronghold, even the air felt cold, dark, and devoid of any human presence. This was one of the many grade 3 prison planets in Sector S, and there was nothing special about it. A grade 3 prison planet's status was neither high nor low in Sector S, and the prisoners it imprisoned were not small fries. However, compared to those people in grade 4 and 5 prisons, they could only be reduced to the background. At least, that was the case in the eyes of the warning system and the guard army. Unlike the prisons of other sectors, in Sector S, be it grade 1 or grade 5 prisons, once a prisoner was imprisoned, they were not allowed to take even half a step out of the prison unless they were released. They would not see the light of day for decades or even longer. It was as if they were isolated. Some people said that level 3 prisons were the prisons with the worst treatment. They thought that level 1 and level 2 prisons still had open fights, so at least they could fight. The prison guards wouldn't be too nervous about the prisoners in level 1 and level 2 prisons. After all, this was a low-level prison in Sector S. On the other hand, the prisoners in the level 4 and level 5 prisons were all slightly famous or influential figures in the entire Star Alliance. Their importance could not be compared to that of the prisons in the first 3 levels. Moreover, the total number of prisoners in grade 4 and grade 5 prisons was less than the number of prisoners in grade 3 prisons. Therefore, in level 4 and level 5 prisons, each prisoner's cell space would be larger, and there would also be some entertainment facilities. Of course, the so-called entertainment facilities were just old and broken players and projectors with distorted images. Compared to the prisoners of the other 4 levels, the prisoners in grade 3 prisons did not have any fights to fight, nor did they have any entertainment facilities. At most, they would have some newspapers and magazines from a few years or decades ago that they could use to wipe their butts after they were done reading. Therefore, some people who were imprisoned in grade 3 prisons for a long period of time would start to develop mental problems. The prison guards would punish those prisoners who babbled on, and those prisoners who could not endure the mental and physical torture would be thrown away like garbage, or turned into a dish for the prisoners in the prison. Click. The elevator door opened, and 2 prison guards walked into the cells on this floor. The cells were all one-sided, and there was an extremely thick partition between each cell, so that each prisoner could not communicate with the other prisoners. The 2 prison guards held whips in their hands. After coming out of the elevator, they came to the entrance of the corridor. After the two prison guards verified their identities at the inspection area, the door at the corridor entrance opened. One of the prison guards pressed a button, and the wall that was originally facing the corridor became transparent. This way, the state of every prisoner in the cell could be seen clearly. Every time this happened, some prisoners who were on the verge of despair would bare their teeth at the prison guards to vent their dissatisfaction and crazy emotions. The prison guards also liked to see this kind of situation, because this way they would have something fun to do. The whip in the hand would hit the transparent wall, and the contact between the whip and the wall would produce an instantaneous high pressure. The wall would convert this instantaneous high pressure into a high-pressure wave on the other side, and the impact of the converted high-pressure wave would increase by several times or even dozens of times. Based on the strength of the prison guard's whip, it would finally affect the prisoner's body. The prisoner who was lying on the wall and baring his teeth at the prison guard was sent flying by the high-pressure wave on the wall and slammed into another wall, and a bloody mark appeared on his body. His hands and feet were bleeding from the shackles, and the wounds that had not healed in the first place became even more serious. Blood dripped onto the floor of the cell. The prisoner roared hysterically, but it was unknown whether it was because of the pain or despair. The other prisoners could also hear the prisoner's roar, but they were willing to listen because it was only at this time that they could hear human voices, even if it was the sound of screams. After the prison guards left and the wall changed, they could no longer hear the sounds outside. They could only hear their own murmurs and heartbeats. The two prison guards looked at the prisoner who was screaming and rolling on the floor, and laughed as if they had seen something fun. When the prison guards were bored, they would also whip every cell and listen to the prisoner's screams, as if it could make them feel like they were the boss here. Even if the prisoners in the cells were very obedient, even if they did not violate any rules, the prison guards would swing the whip in their hands if they wanted to, like trained animals in a circus, and beat these prisoners ruthlessly. However, there was one cell that they wouldn't whip. Perhaps they didn't know why, but they just felt that they shouldn't whip it. Even if they did whip it, they would only whip it once in a while. They wouldn't whip it again just because the prisoner in the cell didn't move. When the prison guards left, they did not remember such a special prisoner. As usual, the prison guards whipped a few cells according to their mood. When they passed by the cell of this special prisoner, they acted as if they did not see it and went straight past it, not even glancing at the prisoner inside. The prisoner locked in this cell did not look like a ferocious villain. Instead, he looked like an academic, cultured person. His every movement was gentlemanly and polite. Even the act of flipping through the newspaper made him look out of place in this prison. He always felt that such a person should be standing in the spacious lecture hall of a higher education institution and talking with confidence and composure, instead of staying in silence in this dark and dirty prison of crime. This unusual prisoner was currently sitting on the only chair in the room. He spread out the newspaper and held a cup in his other hand. Although it was clearly only the bitter water supplied by the cell, the way the prisoner drank the water gave the illusion that he was enjoying the best tea in an elegant restaurant. Despite the changes in the wall, the laughter of the prison guards, and the screams of the prisoner's posture of reading the newspaper did not change. He did not even raise his eyes. However, when the prison guards passed by his cell, the prisoner finally moved his gaze away from the newspaper and looked outside the transparent wall. Perhaps in the eyes of others, there were only two prison guards outside. However, in the eyes of this prisoner, there was a figure beside the two prison guards. This prisoner had a warm smile on his face and nodded, as if he was making small talk. Then, he returned his gaze to the newspaper. When the figure, which was not noticed by others, saw the prisoner, he was stunned for a moment. He then bowed and left the cell. In another cell not far from this one, a big man with a scruffy beard was lying on the bed and snoring. Because his snoring was too loud, the prison guards whipped the big man twice to wake him up. The big man cried out twice after being whipped twice. He sat up in a daze, scratched his disheveled hair, and fell back down again. However, this time, he did not snore. After the prison guards walked past the cell while cursing, the big man opened his eyes and stood up to look outside the cell. He said softly, "Zero? I didn't expect you to come personally this time." On the big man's arm was a tattoo of a black butterfly. The pattern on the butterfly's wings looked very strange, like the face of a devil. Some people called this butterfly the ghost butterfly. The ghost butterfly was also one of the 3 tattoos of the Lon Hudi Hunter group. When the prison guards turned back, the big man was already lying on the bed. The prison guards did not care. They cursed and chose a few cells, whipped a few more times, and left. Half an hour later, in a corner of a building not far from the prison, a young man was waiting there with his arms crossed. The young man's lowered head suddenly raised. That was fast. In front of the young man, a figure slowly appeared, turning from transparent to solid. "The thing has been given to him. When the time comes, we will begin." "Zero, did you see anything else?" the young man asked. Zero's expression was somewhat serious. "I saw someone who should not be here." "Who?" Hunting Blade Jada. Chapter 168. "How is that possible?" the young man exclaimed. Ever since he came to this level 3 prison planet, the young man had always been calm and casual. He had never been so surprised. He couldn't be blamed for being so surprised. Even Ghost Butterfly Ling, who was the current leader of the Blue Butterfly Hunter group, was shocked when she saw the person in the prison who had a calm and incongruous aura. Lone Ranger, Hunting Knife Gaydar, was one of the most famous Lone Rangers apart from the Lone Star Hunter. Even some of the older members of the Vanguard Ace Squad were very careful when facing Hunting Knife Gaydar. Although Hunting Knife Gaydar had a peaceful appearance, he was extremely ruthless on the inside. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been called Hunting Knife. Gaydar was good with the knife. Those who died under his knife were many famous people. Many of them were no less capable than Bart and the others. This was also one of the reasons why people were afraid of Gaydar. As lone hunters, their whereabouts were uncertain to begin with. However, that didn't mean that they had disappeared without a trace. Even if there was little news about the once famous lone hunters, they would still appear once in a while to prove their existence and status. However, since the dispute 50 years ago, there had been no news of Hunting Knife Gaydar. All the electronic publications about hunters did not report any news about Gaydar. 50 years had passed since he disappeared. Some people who were more familiar with what happened back then did not think that Gaydar was involved. Moreover, the list of people who were imprisoned back then did not include the Lone Ranger, Hunting Knife Gaydar. Otherwise, it would definitely be a shocking matter. It would be no less shocking than when the important people of the Big Four were imprisoned. Some people even speculated that Hunting Knife Gaydar had died in some corner. However, Guadai Ling did not expect to see the Lone Ranger in a mere Level 3 prison today. Originally, the Level 3 prison mission did not need to be completed by Guadai Ling himself. However, Guadai Ling happened to pass by and took over Guadai Shichi's job. Guadai Shichi was the young man who spoke. Coincidentally, Guadai Ling met Hunting Knife Gaydar, who had disappeared for 50 years. How could someone like Hunting Blade Gaydar be locked up in a Level 3 prison? The young man was a little annoyed. The name brought about a strong sense of unease. With Hunting Knife Gaydar's ability, how could a mere Level 3 prison hold him? Could it be that he's heavily injured? The young man asked. He's doing very well. He's still the same, still so strong. He was still that gentle demon. The young man paced around in irritation. What about the operation? Let's continue. I've already talked to them. As long as they don't anger that guy, they should be fine. Say, Zero, how many more people like Hunting Blade Gaydar are hiding in the Earth-rank prisons of Sector S? I don't know. During this period of time, Silan Helong had intercepted a lot of secret messages, but there weren't a lot of useful information that he could decode. Moreover, the information that he had deciphered did not include the few important parties. However, through these fragmented, decoded information, Sillen Helong could feel that chaos was already brewing. It was restless, and only waiting for a certain fuse to light it. However, no one knew that this fuse would only be a brawl in a Level 1 prison. Today, Sillen Helong arrived at an area of Sector S that was not the core district. This area was a little more complicated, and there were a lot of Level 1 prison planets in this area. After all, Level 1 prisons held the most people in Sector S after all. There was an unwritten rule in Sector S, and that was that the people imprisoned in a Level 1 prison were either some Sector S hooligans, or Sector S's prison guards and garrisons. When some of the more famous people in Sector S found them an eyesore or punished their subordinates, they would be thrown in there to grind them a little. Other than the Level 1 prisons, most of the Level 2 prisons were like this. Only a very small portion of people were from outside of Sector A. I didn't expect there to be so many fun things to do in a Level 1 prison. Holding his chin, Lung swiped across the screen with his finger and looked at the recent events in this area. 90% of the news in this area was related to prison matters, such as the number of people killed in a certain prison's gang fights, the number of forces involved in a certain prison's conflict, and so on. Gang fights were common occurrences in Level 1 and Level 2 prison planet. It was also an internal matter of Sector S, and even the relevant governments of other sectors were not in a position to interfere. Of course, they might be involved as well, adding fuel to the fire and buying people from behind the scenes. If one were to rank Sector V as the most xenophobic sector in the entire GL, then Sector S was without a doubt the most xenophobic sector in the entire sector. The people of Sector S were tough, fierce, and even more so than the people of Sector V. As a person of Sector S, you could cooperate with people from outside of Sector S, or hire people from outside of Sector S, but you could not become a vassal of an outside force. If you did, the other forces and organizations of Sector S would send out assassins. If it wasn't because of this, things in Sector S wouldn't be so difficult. Oh look, 2 days ago, a Level 1 prison planet in Division SO had a riot. 2 big factions clashed, and thousands of people were killed and injured. Holy shit, thousands of people. That should be a pretty big scale, and there are prison guards and related garrisons among them. Still, there are a lot of people in a Level 1 prison to begin with, so I'm sure some people would be happy to see so many people empty out, Lung said as he flipped through a few more news pages. All of them were related to this matter. This is also known as the double spy incident. Say, Sillen, do you think those people are involved in this incident? Sillen was also looking at the related news on another screen. He knew who those people Lung was talking about was. It's possible, but it's also possible that it's not. If it's 2 big factions, even the Big Four won't be able to infiltrate them easily. To be able to cause such a big upheaval, it definitely involves the core affairs of the 2 big factions. That's true. But those bystanders must have had a feast for their eyes. It's a big chaotic battle, you know. Lung sighed regretfully. Since the incident involved 2 big gangs in Sector S, the related images were not released to the public. Some of the key parts were even blurred out. Although the prisoners of a Level 1 prison in Sector S were not allowed to leave the prison during their sentence, the prison itself had a fairly large space inside it. Inside the space, they could resolve matters with force. All they needed to do was submit an application to the prison administrator and go through the motions. Of course, if the applicant was someone outside of Sector S, they would be rejected almost immediately. This was the difference in treatment. While Sillen was listening to Lung's regretful sigh at the side, he suddenly noticed an unusual movement on the scanner. Something's up. Hearing Sillen's words, Lung straightened his back and stood up. He moved closer to the big screen and looked at the image the scanner was scanning. Escape pods? Lung made some adjustments on the control board, and the scanner's new scan result showed once more 3 people. Their vital signs are weak. Sillin looked at Lung, whose eyes were shining. He knew that the guy's curiosity had been piqued again. But when he saw that escape pod, Sillin couldn't help but feel that he was getting closer to something. After dragging the floating escape pod into the starship, Lung and Sillin walked to the front of the escape pod. The escape pod had been shot once, and its power system was slightly malfunctioning. It was probably only able to escape the crisis by relying on its backup system. Moreover, the life support system inside was also abnormal, and the oxygen supply was running out. Right now, the three people were in a deep coma. TSK, how tragic, Lung said when he saw the three people's condition through the transparent window. The three people inside were in terrible condition. They probably went through a fierce battle before they entered the escape pod, and their wounds weren't even treated. Adding that to their physical exhaustion and lack of oxygen, their condition was undoubtedly worse. He asked the robots to open the hatch and carry the three people into an emergency room next to the little fellow. The medical robots began to treat the three unconscious people. Speaking of which, when Sillin was treating the little fellow known as Hellhound, he didn't plan to do it himself. However, the moment the medical robots got close to the little fellow bit it out of habit, directly biting off one of the medical robot's arms. After that, Sillin took over directly. But no matter how alert they were to outsiders, these three people were currently in a deep coma, and could only be treated by the medical robots. Still, the three people's physical attributes weren't bad. One of them had a very strong constitution. From the data displayed on the machine after treatment, it could be seen that this fellow's regenerative ability was astonishing. Although it couldn't compare to the little fellow, it wasn't that far off. Flying snake tattoo? Lung exclaimed in surprise. When the clothing robots were treating the three people, the tattoo on their backs was also revealed. It was a snake with wings. Even though it was just a tattoo, the pair of snake eyes gave off a sinister feeling. Sillin, we're in luck. They're from Flying Snake. Lung immediately began to search for information related to Flying Snake, the local force of Sector S. This was because Flying Snake and Mad Owl were responsible for the recent riot in the Rank 1 prison. Flying Snake and Mad Owl were two of the biggest forces in Sector S. If these two forces had clashed inside a Rank 1 prison, then did this mean that they had clashed fiercely somewhere outside the prison as well? These three people wouldn't be in such a miserable state otherwise. Although some information required a bit of effort to obtain, the final result of the search was enough to make Sillin Helong feel that it was worth it. 8 hours later, the person with the flying snake tattoo on his back, who had the strongest regenerative ability compared to the other two, woke up. Yo, you're awake so quickly. As expected of Flying Snake Tsiju. Tsiju sat up abruptly the moment he opened his eyes. Before he could observe his current situation, he heard a cynical voice. Tsiju checked his body's current condition and saw his two subordinates lying on the sickbeds not far away. The instruments beside the sickbeds were displaying their vital data. Chigio raised his eyes. The pupils in his amber eyes were not round like the eyes of most humans. Instead, they were like the tips of swords, slender and long like the edge of a blade. Although the three of them had been rescued, Tsiju did not let down his guard. Who are you? Since the other party already knew his identity, Tsiju did not want to beat around the bush. Even though he was sitting on the sickbed, even though he had just woken up from a coma due to heavy injuries, his words still exuded an extraordinary aura. Sigh, not even a word of thanks. As the voice spoke, the door to the infirmary opened. A beautiful robot stood in front of the door, holding 3 sets of clothes in her hands. To be precise, 3 robes. Lung did not have that many clothes that did not suit him. Tsiju looked at the beautiful robot standing at the door of the infirmary with a smile on her face. He got up and flipped down the sickbed. After a brief moment of absent-mindedness, he quickly got used to it. He grabbed a robe and put it on. There was another beautiful robot waiting outside. When she saw Tsijiu come out, the beautiful robot raised her hand and said politely, "Please." Without saying much, Tsijiu followed the robot to the control room. At first, he thought that he would be brought to the conference room or some other place, but he did not expect to be brought directly to the control room. These two were really bold. Were they not afraid that he would turn around and take over the control? The three of them seemed to be about the same age. Tsijiu looked at Lung and Silen, and quickly came up with an evaluation in his heart. These two are both tough. One looks cynical and simple-minded, while the other looks simple and honest, but they're both F***king scammers. The screen beside Lung was still showing information about the flying snake, and he had no intention of avoiding it. Tsijiu walked over and pulled a chair over to sit down. "Speak. Why did you save us? What's your motive for saving us? What do you want in return?" "I saw your escape pod floating outside, so I came over. I knew who you were because of the tattoo on your back. As for the reward," Silen glanced at Lung, who was thinking hard with his eyes lowered. He thought to himself, "Actually, you've already thought about it, haven't you?" Lung clapped his hands. "Oh, I got it. But I have to ask you first. Did you escape from the Mad Owl?" Chigio's eyes darkened, and it was as if the air around him had frozen solid. However, both Silen and Lung maintained their original expressions and remained unmoved. "Angry? Angry my *SS. He was speaking the truth." Tsijiu smiled, but his eyes were filled with coldness. "For now. Since I'm still alive, then the battle isn't over yet." Lung kicked Silen. "Look at you, you're still full of vigor even after being beaten to this state. As expected of the flying snake." Silen could clearly feel the air pressure around Tsijiu dropping even further. However, Tsijiu's words just now did reveal a piece of information. He was going to make a comeback, and logically speaking, any external force would take the opportunity to interfere. After all, the flying snake was quite influential in Sector F. However, it was obvious that Silen Helong did not do as Tsijiu thought. Silen let out a slow yawn. He hadn't rested well recently, so he would make up for it when he had the chance. Lung sat on the swivel chair and spun in circles. He did not seem to take Tsijiu's words to heart. Tsijiu's long and thin pupils shrank like a snake's. After a few minutes of silence, Tsijiu straightened his sitting posture. He understood that he had a request right now, and if he did not speak frankly, then the answers of these two people in front of him would absolutely piss him off. "All right, I need you to send me to a place. You can name the reward." "Are you talking about money?" Lung swiveled his chair left and right. "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in money right now. If it's energy blocks, then I'm not interested in them if they aren't some very special kind of energy block. What can you give us?" Tsijiu fell silent. He was not afraid of someone making a request, because at least he would know what they were after. But now, after thinking for a moment, Tsijiu said, "I don't know you people well, and I don't even know which side you belong to. That's why I don't know what you need. I can give you a lot, and I can't give you a lot of things. Things that I can give you, and things that I can't give you." Silen and Lung looked at each other, understanding each other's thoughts. "If you go back, what's the success rate?" Silen asked. "I can't guarantee it," Tsijiu said, "but I will fight. A debt of blood must be paid with blood." This time, too many things were involved, and it was related to Tsijiu's position and power in the flying snakes. Moreover, this time, Tsijiu was ready to fight with his life, but he did not expect a traitor to appear, directly messing up his plans. He thought that this matter would end unwillingly, but who knew that he would be rescued? Since he was still alive, then he would continue fighting. Some things would not end until one party died. After Tsijiu finished speaking, he sat there quietly, but the murderous aura around his body was very thick. "All right, we can send you to the place you mentioned, but you should know that a debt of gratitude is very difficult to repay. We saved you and your companions, and sending you back is also giving you a chance to take revenge. In that case, in terms of value, this reward is hard to determine, Lung said in a joking tone. Still, it's worth it to be able to watch a show. I hope you won't let us down. I won't. After saying that, Lung arranged a room for Tsijiu. As for Tsijiu's other two companions, they would wait until they woke up. However, Tsijiu still felt that Lung and Silin were a little unreliable. After all, this kind of deal was too strange. They saved your life, and then sent you back to overturn the turf war, but just to watch a show? What kind of scam was this? But Tsijiu couldn't figure out their true intentions at the moment, so he decided to leave it at that for now and think about it when he returned to his own territory. Moreover, Tsijiu didn't know the true identities of Silin Helong either. After all, as an external force, there was no way they would come to Sector S with just two people. Of course, that was excluding that cat and that half-human, half-dog guy. The place Tsijiu mentioned wasn't too far away, but for safety's sake, Tsijiu had pointed out a roundabout route on the star map of Sector S. This way, they could avoid certain eyes and ears and minimize accident. Therefore, flying along the roundabout route took another 2 days, and these 2 days were practically torture for Tsijiu and his two subordinates. The conversation between Silin Helong and Tsijiu's trio was one thing when he didn't say anything, but the moment he did, Tsijiu's trio wanted nothing more than to go berserk on the spot. How could there be such a person who could infuriate people to death without paying for it? Right now, Tsijiu's trio were in a situation where their legs were stuck in a swamp, and Silin Helong was the person who extended a helping hand to them. But this helper was dragging you out while raising his leg to kick your face, and there was even a cat making sarcastic remarks at the side. How could it not be infuriating? Chapter 169. As one of the candidates for the successor of the Flying Snake, Tsijiu rarely had any rivals among his peers. Except for a handful of people, Tsijiu believed that he was no match for the others. Therefore, on the Flying Snake, the people around Tsijiu were basically his subordinate. This had also formed a habit for Tsijiu to act like a superior. However, on this starship, this was not the first time that Tsijiu had suffered a setback. In just 2 short days, every time he wanted to probe Silin Helong's strength, he would be choked to the point of panic. The two people who were rescued from the escape pod together with Tsijiu were called Snacko and Serpent. They could be categorized as die-hard loyalists. After this incident, Tsijiu trusted the two of them even more. If Tsijiu successfully took over the Flying Snake in the near future, the two of them would undoubtedly stand at a very high position. As for the way they got along, Silin Helong did not want to pay attention to it. Lung was interested in how they had been beaten to this state and had almost lost their lives. He even analyzed the problem for them in passing. He used infuriating words to hit the nail on the head and not give them any face. Every time, he provoked Chigio so much that he wanted to kill these 2 fellows, no, 3 fellows, and that cat that was helping him out by the side. Hey, Flying Snake, don't lose again this time. We've put in a lot of capital, Lung said as he sat on the chair and crossed his legs. Capital, my ass. Capital, my ass. Tsijiu's forehead was throbbing, but he did not flare up. When he was on the Flying Snake, he did not put up with it like this. But in Silin's words, when you are under someone else's roof, how can you not lower your head? When he said this, the Huimao on Silin's shoulder also said in all seriousness, Young man, you have to be calm. Don't be impatient. Impatient, your face is full of sh*t. Tsijiu did not want to see it and not feel annoyed, but he had to sit in the control room and give directions. In this area, he was the only one who was more familiar with the more secretive routes. If he completely left it to Lung, there was no telling if something would go wrong. This time, he had to be very careful. In the last incident, Tsijiu had lost a group of people, and he himself had almost lost his life. In the beginning, when Tsijiu was faced with Lung and Silin's straightforward words, he could not help but make a move. But from the moment Silin grabbed the snake's spear with his bare hands, CGU knew that in terms of individual combat ability, he was definitely no match for Silen. When Snacko and Serpent saw this, their hair almost stood on end. It should be known that CGU's snake spear carried a high pressure. In any case, they would not be able to take it head-on. They did not expect Silen to be able to withstand it without batting an eyelid. Although Tsijiu had only unleashed the second level of snake spear, and did not even bring out the sharpest edge and snake teeth, even so, it was still not something an ordinary person could hold. Snacko and Serpent also wanted to spar with Silen. Their hands had always been itchy when it came to people who could fight, but Silen directly said, "You want to fight someone who hasn't even recovered his bones? Is there shit in your brain?" In the end, Lung came up with an idea, a childish arm wrestling. In the end, Silen won by a small margin. Lung said that no discord, no concord, so he took out some alcohol to celebrate. After chugging down a few bottles of alcohol, CGU sat at the side and watched the four drunkards sing crazily, one louder and one more out of tune than the other. It was as if they were competing to see who could go out of tune the most. The four who were still in high spirits after their drunken madness began to play cards. Due to their terrible drinking behavior earlier, they shamelessly played around until they fell asleep. Although Tsijiu was so angry at Silen Helong that the veins on his forehead were twice as thick, it had to be said that in his heart, Tsijiu acknowledged them. To be able to enter Sector S with just the two of them, courage alone was not enough. Without ability they would not live for long. Speaking of character, although the two people's mouths were cheap and sharp, everything they said was the truth. Of course, they could not rule out the possibility that the two people did it on purpose. CGU couldn't figure out Silen Hulong's intentions. He couldn't see through these two people. The elders of Flying Snake once said that one should not recklessly offend them as long as they were not enemies. CGU didn't want to make more powerful enemies, especially at a time like this. They soon arrived at the planet CGU mentioned. It wasn't the Flying Snake's headquarters, but it was a very important place. There was a meeting scheduled a few days ago in Flying Snake's territory on this planet. Originally, this meeting wasn't too important, and it was just a routine matter. However, the double spy incident had caused Flying Snake to suffer a loss, and they had even lost a group of elite. Flying Snake CGU's fate was even more uncertain. It was night time on the dark side of the planet. The streets were brightly lit and the nightlife was rich. Groups of young people riding on hoverboards or driving modified flying cars could be seen everywhere. Many of them were less than 20 years old. They clamored and sped through the air, seeking excitement and excitement. A small convoy of flying cars sped past with their lights on. The people who were clamoring to fly in chaos consciously made way for them. Moreover, as the convoy flew, some people would join them in turn. The people driving the flying cars would follow directly, and the people riding on the hoverboards would skillfully put away the hoverboards in the air and land directly into the car with the hood open. Then, the roof of the flying car would slowly close. It seemed that this cooperation had been going on for a long time. A 15 or 16-year-old boy with a hedgehog haircut put the hoverboard into his bag and said to the driver in front, "Any news from the boss?" The driver controlled the steering wheel with one hand and held a cigarette in the other. When he heard the boy's words, he took a puff and frowned. Not yet. For a moment, the atmosphere in the car was a little dull and depressing. The boy lit up a cigarette and took a puff. The flamboyance he showed when he was riding with others on the hoverboards was completely restrained, and he appeared abnormally quiet. Kids shouldn't smoke all the time. It's bad for their health, the driver said. I'm going to be 16 soon. The boy retorted and flicked the cigarette butt in his hand. I've fought with you guys many times. Don't treat me like a child anymore. Tell me, what are you going to do this time? The driver no longer bothered about the problem of smoking. He took a deep puff and flicked the unfinished cigarette into a small opening. When the smoke flew over the top of the small opening, it was sucked in and closed. This will be mentioned in today's meeting. What if those people find an excuse to delay it again? The boy asked. Then we'll do it ourselves. There was a strong murderous intent in this sentence. You got the guns? We got them. The driver smiled sarcastically. Black Snake wants to use us to eliminate Mad Owl's group, and at the same time, create an accident so that we can't come back. Dream on. The driver opened the hood of the car again, and the smell of smoke in the car was blown away in an instant. He did not wake up at all. More and more people gathered in the convoy, and finally, it became a large convoy with hundreds of people. There were still some people in each car, and there were more than 1,000 people in total. The convoy came to a spacious building, and there were already people waiting there. After parking the flying car, the people in the car walked out. You're here. The person waiting there said. Only this many people. The others either couldn't make it back or didn't dare to come. Cowardly bastards, I'll kick them to death sooner or later. Let's not talk about this for now. Has the meeting started? The person who asked was the smoking driver, and behind him was the boy. It has started. I heard that the higher-ups are having a heated argument. Black Snake has been slandering the boss a lot. What about the others? Still the same. Just as they were talking, another motorcade came over. Compared to this motorcade, this one was much more high-spirited. When they came out, they even whistled and twisted their necks a few times. Yo, Golden Hoop, why are you standing here? Can't you get in? A guy with messy hair walked out of the car and said carelessly. He took a puff and deliberately made a few smoke rings. Without waiting for a reply, the person behind the man with the broom laughed loudly and said, Is it because your little boss is dead and there's no one to support you, so you came here to cry to the Elder Council? Of course, do you even have to ask? Look at their crying faces, it's really. Sigh, they deserve it. Looking at the people on the other side answering their own questions and mocking them, the other side was also angry. F***CK. Do you F***King want to die? If you do, I'll grant your wish. Tell me, how do you want to die? Bah, your ancestors. Even if Black Snake is stewed, the boss will be fine. Even if the boss isn't here, that wretched Black Snake wants to take over? Bah, even a pig is better than him. Because of the rules, they had to pay attention to their words and actions in front of this building. However, in this situation, the two small groups were arguing with each other. In fact, their words were much more restrained. Otherwise, they could say all sorts of nasty things. A middle-aged man walked out from inside the building and said, Hey, you two. Alright, look at where this place is. Although this person was not one of the higher-ups of Flying Snake, in this building, this person was in charge of the main management. Therefore, by right, both sides should show some respect. However, now that both sides were getting more and more heated, they could no longer control themselves and were about to fight. Behind the middle-aged man, an enchanting woman in her 20s walked over. She pulled the middle-aged man's sleeve and said, Don't worry about it. Your people on both sides won't hold you responsible at all. It's better to report it to the higher-ups. While you're at it, you can also transfer a group of people to guard against them. Previously, Black Snake had told this woman that if the two sides were to fight today, don't interfere and let them do as they please. Black Snake had already sent people to add fuel to the fire in the dark. It seemed that this time, Black Snake wanted to take advantage of the double spy incident to clean up the subordinates of Flying Snake. Seeing that the two sides were getting more and more heated, Golden Hoop raised his hand and pulled the two people in front of him. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly felt a strong sense of danger. Reflexively, he moved to the side, but he was still shot. Fortunately, his vital organs were avoided. F***CK, mother ***, they actually shot. This time, the two sides directly took out their weapons and started fighting. However, before two shots were fired, an angry roar almost drowned out the gunshots of both sides. Stop right there. Hearing this voice, the people who were so angry that they wanted to spew blood were silent. Then, they exclaimed, "Boss!" The people on Broomhead's side looked like they had eaten sh*t. Their faces were twisted, but their movements were stiff. It wasn't that they couldn't move, but they didn't dare to move recklessly. Once they heard this voice, they felt pressured. Golden Hoop covered his abdomen and looked at the sky. 3 people gradually descended on the hoverboard. The one in the lead was the main topic of this dispute, Flying Snake, CG. Even at night, under the shining lights, the pair of sword-like pupils was extremely strange. The surrounding temperature dropped by a few degrees. "Boss, Snacko, Serpent!" Someone shouted in surprise. CGU walked down from the hoverboard with a sullen face. Both sides consciously made way for him. No one dared to be presumptuous in front of Flying Snake. Ignoring the Golden Hoop's words, CGU walked on, but no one cared. As long as CGU was back, it was the best news. CGU and the Golden Hoop's people walked closer. As they walked, before anyone could react, the snake spear in CGU's hand suddenly popped out. It directly expanded to the 3rd level, and the long, sharp snake teeth pierced through the gaps between a few people and nailed into one of them. The part of the person's body that was nailed by the snake teeth quickly blackened and rotted. The person wanted to scream, but all that came out was a hoarse voice. No one could hear what he was saying. His eyes were filled with fear and despair. "Boss, you..." The person next to him was about to speak, but he suddenly remembered something and stopped. CGU glanced at him and nodded in satisfaction. With CGU's personality, he would not kill without a reason. Therefore, as the boss of this group, even if his subordinates had doubts, they could not question him. This was something that everyone around CGU knew. The person who spoke obviously remembered and did not continue. He pulled out the snake spear and retracted the snake teeth at the front of the spear. The snake spear shrunk back to its original form. "I hate traitors the most." Hearing CGU's words, the Golden Hoop's eyes narrowed. "Boss, you're saying that the person who shot me was that brat. I already knew that there was a traitor here, but I didn't have time to find out who it was. But now I feel like he died too easily." "Then drag him out and chop him up a few more times," Snacko said. Now, Snacko was not as casual as when he was facing Silin Helong. Just like CGU, Snacko's face was gloomy and full of vigor. Although Serpent did not have an ice-cold face, the light in his narrow eyes was dangerous no matter how one looked at it. He was like a poisonous snake that was ready to give its prey a fatal blow. CGU did not look at the traitor anymore. He turned his head and glanced at Broomhead, then slowly walked over. As he walked over, Broomhead and the rest of the people unconsciously retreated. "What are you retreating for? Did I allow you to retreat?" CGU's voice sounded very calm, but those who knew CGU knew that this was his habitual behavior before he made a killing move. "Boss CGU, it's a misunderstanding, it's really a misunderstanding, this..." Broomhead swallowed the words at the back of his throat and then spat them out along with the blood. On Broomhead's throat, there was a deep cut that almost cut off his entire head. But CGU's attack was very skillful. There were still a few important nerves connected, so he did not immediately lose consciousness and die. Broomhead could feel his blood flowing out from his throat and felt the despair and fear of his life slipping away. CGU nodded his head. "Teach him a lesson." After saying that, he no longer cared about the matter here. Snacko and Serpent rushed over with their people. The lesson was not something that could be remembered if it was not deep enough. CGU walked into the building. The people who were called over were fully armed and ready to rush out to stop the dispute. When they saw CGU, they immediately put away their weapons and opened a path for CGU to enter. "Don't worry about the matter outside. It will be over soon." "Okay," the leader respectfully replied. After CGU entered the inner door, the heavily armed people wiped their sweat. As expected of the flying snake, his aura is getting stronger and stronger. Was that killing intent just now? It's so scary. It feels like I'm being stared at by a big snake. No wonder the people above are so optimistic about CGU. In comparison, Black Snake is much inferior. Black Snake? If he didn't have a good father, he would have been killed by CGU long ago. But then again, to be able to survive such a situation, CGU is indeed capable. Don't care so much. Previously, I said that CGU has fallen. For the sake of the people above, I will give Black Snake some face. But now that CGU is back, Black Snake has no face left. In the sky not far away from the building, Silin Helong was watching the situation from inside a flying car. Right now, Silin Helong was wearing a new disguise mask developed by the Andryara family. It was very difficult to see through his true face without careful inspection. As for Huimao, he was teaching the little fellow who had woken up to read on the starship outside the planet. The starship was stealthily parked not far away from the planet. TSK, as expected of the flying snake. He's got quite an aura. I'm so jealous. Look at him, he's so arrogant. Jealous, jealous. Lung shouted. So this is the so-called internal strife of a gang? How cruel. They should have just killed him. Silin also sighed. Compared to the internal affairs of the hunter regiments, the gang rules of Sector S were obviously much crueler. It was no wonder that a person like CGU was raised. Silin, I also want to enjoy the pleasure of being a boss, just like CGU. It feels so good. It's so much more stylish than having a bodyguard. And then, with a large group of people, I want them to wear black windbreakers and sunglasses, each of them holding an assault rifle, and at their waists. Lung said in a self-indulgent manner. Silin struck him down rudely. That old man Berzet will die of anger. Lung covered his face and wailed. Don't mention that old man, what kind of deceptive gentlemanly etiquette is that? Silin Helong waited for Tsijiu directly outside the building. Tsijiu had said that he would pull out the thorn in his back after this meeting, and then make new arrangements to make a comeback and take revenge. Silin Helong said that he would participate in the mission they were assigned to at the Level 1 prisons, so the relevant matters should wait until Tsijiu was done with his meeting. Of course, since he had come to Flying Snake's territory, the host, Tsijiu, had to treat him well no matter what, let alone his savior. 3 hours later, Tsijiu came out and whispered a few words to Snacko before leaving with the long line of motorcades. While no one was paying attention, Snacko brought Silin Helong to another place that belonged to Tsiji. Chapter 170. Logically speaking, Snacko was a strength type, and Serpent was a speed type. If he wanted to get something done, it would be more convenient to rely on Serpent's speed. However, it was precisely because of this that many people would place more attention on Serpent. If Serpent disappeared from Tsijiu's side, then those people would definitely think, what secret mission did Tsijiu have for Serpent to complete? Therefore, when Tsijiu and Serpent attracted more people's attention, Snacko would be able to bring Silin Helong to Tsijiu's territory more discreetly. Flying Snake's place isn't bad, Lung said as he walked around the room Tsijiu had arranged for them. It was called a room, but in reality, it was close to a garden-style villa with a swimming pool. When he saw the swimming pool, Lung immediately stripped himself naked and jumped in to enjoy himself. Silin thinks, good thing Berzet isn't here, or he'd be so angry he'd lose his hair again. This was how the so-called etiquette was used to be forgotten. Of course, Silin knew that Tsijiu was very busy. After a big meeting, he would gather his subordinates for a small meeting, arrange a plan of action, and pacify internal strife. As the leader of this small group and the key candidate for the successor of Flying Snake, Tsijiu obviously needed to analyze the problem and fight a comeback after a single failure. Schotten once said that in a hunter regiment, the development of a B squadron not only depended on personal strength and opportunities, but also connections. Compared to the other B squadrons in Vanguard, the 6th Division had a very serious problem with connections. It had nothing to do with foresight or personal strength. The main reason was that the former 6th Team commander, Theru, was too independent. As a result, the development of the 6th Division had plummeted the moment Theru left. With more connections, he would be able to expand his business further. With more trading channels, he would be able to progress faster. Similarly, even if he wasn't in a hunter regiment, Silen still needed to learn about some things not known to the average person. Not only did he need to explore the world, he also needed to obtain information through wider channels such as the local forces of Sector S. Since he was fated to meet the flying snake Tsijiu, after spending some time with him, he felt that it was worth grasping this opportunity. Clearly, Lung, who came from a merchant family, understood this better. Perhaps your elders could find him through their connections, but this channel was not suitable for you personally. After all, others only cared about your elders, not you. If you keep relying on your elders, sooner or later, you will be trampled on. Silen took a shower and filled his stomach. He grabbed a bottle of wine and lay on the sofa, drinking while watching the local television on this planet. He had to admit that there weren't many restrictions on this planet. There were a lot of variety and explicit language on the television. It was no wonder that the people here matured early. While he was watching, a communicator rang beside him. It was Tsijiu who had asked Snacko to arrange it for them. It would be easier to communicate on this planet. After the call was connected, Tsijiu's image appeared. He looked very tired, but his eyes were bright. It was obvious that today's meeting had gone well. How is it? Is the place you're staying? I didn't mistreat you two young masters, did I? Tsijiu was very confident in the place he had arranged for them. On the entire planet, this place could be considered a rare luxurious area. It's good. But the training room walls aren't hard enough, and the swimming pool isn't big enough. Two choices. Stay there, or stay on the street. Then stay here. Alright, contact me directly if there's anything. If you can't reach me, then look for Snacko or Serpent. They can handle some things here. Rest for a day first. We're discussing countermeasures right now. I'll let you know when we're done. Alright, do you need weapons? I can sell them cheaply. No need for weapons. Go to your meeting. Don't get chased to the escape pod again. Obviously, Silen's words had provoked Tsijiu again. He hung up immediately. After Tsijiu ended the call, he looked at the person beside him. What do you think of them? Beside Tsijiu sat an old man with a cane. The cane looked like a snake. The old man's hands rested on the head of the cane. They're not enemies for the time being. As long as they're not enemies, then I'll act according to the original plan. Do your best. 2 days later, Tsijiu came over to Silen Helong to explain the time and general route of the operation. Of course, the internal operations of flying snakes would not be revealed. Alright, you just need to get the layout of the prison. When we arrive at the destination, we'll split up. Don't worry, I won't drag you down, Lung said while lying on the edge of the swimming pool. You don't need to provide any equipment. It's so cheap. Tsijiu ignored Lung's last sentence. Alright, that's it. When it's time to leave, I'll get Snacko to pick you up. Tsijiu's schedule was tight. He didn't have much time to communicate with Silen Helong. After explaining the few important matters, Tsijiu left in a hurry. Let's go. Clean up the equipment. Silen kicked Lung, who was lying on the edge of the swimming pool. He didn't want to move at all. It's time to try out your new product. In the room, Lung opened one of the chests and brought out 2 sets of clothes, as well as an extremely thin, almost transparent mask. Clothes, pants, and mask. These are all one set. Copy suit. It can copy hundreds of different clothing materials. It can be controlled by brainwaves, but it's not suitable for people with underdeveloped brains. As he spoke, Lung put on one set after another. He then opened the wardrobe in the room, unfolded the hanging clothes, and stood in front of a set of formal attire. Then, Silen watched as an identical set of formal attire appeared on Lung's body. Moreover, the models were automatically matched, and it seemed to fit him very well. Then, Lung turned on a small projector. An unfamiliar face appeared on it. At the same time, Lung's face changed rapidly, and it looked exactly the same as the face on the projector. Scylla looked at it carefully and nodded. Not bad. How much does this copy suit cost in the market? It's only in the testing stage. It hasn't hit the market yet. But even if it does, it's very difficult to buy it without proper channels, Lung said as he tidied up his attire and looked at himself in the mirror. I've decided to experience the life of a prison guard and a prisoner. Although it's only a level 1 prison, if everything goes well, I might be able to try it again in a level 2 or 3 prison. Scylla chose a few guns to match his hands. As for Lung, he began to load things on his body like a hidden treasure. They must have specially made them according to Lung's habits before they came to Sector S. There were more of those underhanded weapons, and if they were to be honest, they were more like hidden weapons. It was just that these hidden weapons were a little too destructive. Are you really going to blow up the prison? Not really. It's just that it's a rare trip, so I should at least keep some memories. I might be able to use them when the time comes. Lung continued to load the microcontrolled bombs. Scylla shook his head. This guy sure is suited for causing trouble. Lung's original goal was to check out the situation in Sector S's prison, and then take the opportunity to cause some trouble and entertain himself. However, Scylla had a feeling that he might be able to reap some great rewards this time. All the famous people from 50 years ago had vanished without a trace for a time. Scylla thought that he might be able to find the answer in Sector S's prison. The big guns were hidden in the city courts. Would he be able to discover some people in a level 1 prison? Scylla was looking forward to it very much. The day of the operation soon arrived. The people from Flying Snakes' operation this time were divided into several batches. CGU had secretly arranged for Scylla Helong to board the spaceplane that was heading towards the Level 1 prison planet. A Level 1 prison planet. From outer space, half of the planet was covered by a fortress-like prison. It was filled with a heavy and oppressive feeling. However, it was different for the people from Flying Snake. The closer they got to the prison planet, the more excited they became. Today was the day when a batch of people would be released from this planet after completing their sentences. A batch of people from Flying Snakes and Mad Owls would be released. Last time it was a riot inside the prison, but this time it was different. They were preparing to fight both inside and outside the prison. There was a set area around the prison that forbade firepower attack. Otherwise, they would be attacked by the prison's defense system decisively and indiscriminately. However, outside of this area was the place where the released prisoners often took the opportunity to solve their problems. The prison guards had installed a lot of surveillance devices there, and while they were fighting fiercely here, the prison guards on the other side were happily sitting in the surveillance room and watching. It was so much better than watching TV. It was a live broadcast, and it was free. After the spaceplane landed, Scylla Helong separated from the people from Flying Snake. Their goals were different, so their routes of action were different. A large transport plane slowly flew over from the direction of the prison and landed at the edge of the security area. A prison guard walked out and looked at the spaceplanes parked in this area. Obviously, there were people from several forces. The prison guard glanced around and smiled. This lineup is quite strong. The stronger the lineup, the more intense the battle later. He had to hurry back to watch the live broadcast. Thinking about it, the prison guard turned around and shouted at the people inside to hurry up and come out. The people who came out of the transport plane spontaneously walked towards the forces they belonged to. Eye contact with their companions and secret signals had already begun. Some people moved their bodies as they walked, so that their bodies would be in the best condition as soon as possible. The bloodthirsty excitement in their eyes could not be suppressed, especially the people from Flying Snake. They were going to fight back well this time. After all the released prisoners walked out, the prison guards walked back into the transport plane and drove it back to the prison. After the transport plane drove into the warehouse, there were more than 30 prison guards escorting them. Before they came out, the people in the prison's control room began to shout, "Hurry, it's starting, it's starting! F***CK, the firepower is fierce. This is a big one." The prison guards who were escorting the prisoners quickly sped up and rushed out of the transport plane to the control room. However, they did not notice that when they came out, there were 2 more people who were also wearing prison guards' uniforms. Silin Helong split up and calmly walked towards a passage in the prison guard uniform. Looking at the time, it was almost time for the time Tsijiu mentioned. The riot in the prison was about to begin. Bang! Bang! The sound came from another part of the prison, where a large number of prisoners were being held. F***CK, there's a fight inside too, a prison guard shouted. Look at both sides at the same time. Quick, get the surveillance footage inside. TSK, it's quite a big deal. It seems that Flying Snakes is going to take revenge this time. Should we go and take a look? What if it gets too big? A prison guard asked worriedly. Who cares? If it gets too big, we'll just have to ask the people behind them for the fine. If they don't know what's going on and go beyond the range, then they can't blame us. Another prison guard said as he pressed a red button. It was the defense system of the prison cell. After pressing the button, the status was changed to a defense status. In other words, once those prisoners went out of the range of the prison cell, they would kill every single one of them. After listening to their conversation, Silin left. There were basically no prison guards in the passage. Now, they were sitting in their respective control rooms watching the battle live. They would leave the defense to the defense system. Perhaps they had been doing this for many years, but they would never have thought that today would be a special day. Silin walked towards the prison cell. As he walked, he suddenly stopped and turned around to look behind him. There was still no one. After looking for a while, Silin turned around and continued walking. Just as Silin turned around, small protrusions appeared on the walls of the tubular passage, moving in the direction that Silin was walking. After walking through this passage, Silin did not continue to walk towards the prison cell. Instead, he turned around and walked towards another passage. It was not the direction of the prison cell, but the direction of the warehouse. Along the way, he also encountered prison guards here, but these prison guards came out halfway to relieve their physiological need. After a hurried greeting or a direct nod, they ran back to the control room to continue watching the battle. Silin's face was a copy of a prison guard's, but the place where the prison guard stayed was still some distance away, so he would not be exposed for the time being. Listening to the prison guard's loud discussion, Silin thought that the scale of this battle was indeed quite big, but Silin raised his head and saw another prison guard walking over from the warehouse. Silin smiled and nodded at the prison guard, then brushed past him. After Silin turned around the corner, the prison guard turned to look at the place where Silin disappeared. A red flash passed through his pupils, and he stuck out his tongue to lick it. However, this person's tongue was dark blue and very long, almost touching his forehead. The smile on the corner of his mouth was full of cruelty. When Silin was walking towards the warehouse, he took out a communicator on his wrist that looked similar to the ones used by the other prison guards. In reality, however, this communicator had been modified. Although this modified communicator couldn't make voice calls, it had a higher level of confidentiality. It could quickly transmit information to someone on another planet using a password. After briefly entering a few messages, Silin put away the communicator again, raised his head, and looked towards the warehouse. He smiled. In another part of the prison, Lung turned on the communicator, looked at the message from Silin, and replied, "Got it." Then he continued walking forward. There was a puddle of what looked like a water stain next to him. Upon closer inspection, one would find that it was viscous, and its composition was similar to some of the components of blood. At the same time, on another planet, Tsijiu, who was fighting with his subordinates, noticed that the communicator in his hand was vibrating. The vibration frequency let him know that the message was sent by Silin. Since Silen was sending a message at this time, it should be something very important. So, Cgu left the battle circle after cutting down a person who jumped over, and signaled for Serpent to take his place. Outside the battle circle, Cgu looked at the message displayed on the communicator. It was not long, but it pointed out all the important problems. After seeing the message, Cgu's expression changed abruptly. After giving some instructions to the people behind him, he quickly returned to the spaceship, and at the same time, he opened several communication excuses and sent out orders. On the level 1 prison planet that Silen was on, outside the prison area, the people who were fighting received orders from the person in charge. Hurry up, evacuate in 10 minutes. In the prison, the people of the Flying Snakes, who were fighting in the cells, also received orders. Their operation changed, and they would act according to the new operation plan. The closer Silen got to the warehouse, the more obvious the smell of blood became. According to the smell of the blood, it should be a human, and the time of death was not long, only a few minutes. Thinking of the person who passed by, Silen moved his fingers, and a blade silently appeared between his fingers. Other than one warehouse, the doors of the other warehouses were closed, and the smell of blood came from this open warehouse. Accompanied by the increasingly thick smell of blood, there was also the sound of chewing. Judging from the sound, there should be a lot of it. He silently appeared beside the cabin door, hiding his aura. Although the lights inside were not turned on, Silen could clearly see the situation inside. A prison guard who had almost been eaten to the point that only his skeleton was left, and more than a dozen mouse-like things were gnawing around him. They only looked like mice, but they did not have the fur of mice. Instead, they were covered with a layer of metal-like armor, and their limbs were thicker. Their sharp claws could leave deep marks on the bones, and the spikes on their long tongues scraped the meat off the bones layer by layer. But a soft sound startled the guys who were busy gnawing inside. They looked up at the cabin door, and in the darkness, their red eyes flashed with a crazy and bloodthirsty light. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Silen threw the blades in his hands before they could jump into the air. These flying blades were made of special materials, and they were similar to the ones he used to kill the Skeleton King. However, they were slightly smaller, and the shape of the blades had been altered. The poison in the knife had also changed. 5 knives stabbed 5 of them. Fortunately, although the outer armor of the thing was hard, it was not to the point where the flying knives could not penetrate it. The thing that was stabbed by the flying knives gradually turned into a puddle of water stains as it died. However, it was more viscous, and the original outer armor had long melted with the death of the body. After taking care of 5 at once, Silen raised his hand, and the half-length wrist knife popped out. The knife flashed, but the sound of it slicing through the air was very soft. Only when it hit the thing did it produce a slightly louder sound. The few that jumped over were cleanly cleaved in half. 3 tried to escape, but Silen's 3 flying knives nailed them there and turned them into water stains. After dealing with these things, Silen turned his head to look at a corner not far away. However, before Silen said anything, a person walked out from the corner. He looked relatively thin, with 2 hoosies and a headscarf. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." His tone sounded like he was saying sorry, but he did it on purpose. The soft sound from before was deliberately made by this person to attract the attention of the things in the warehouse and attack Silen. Chapter 171. Silen said nothing and simply stared at Hoosie. The blades bounced between his fingers and reflected cold light under the illumination of the wall lamp. "All right." Hoosie raised his hands and flipped them over to show that he was harmless and that he did not have any threatening weapons. "I apologize for what happened just now, but I don't regret it." Seeing that Silen did not attack him in anger because of his words, Hoosie rolled his eyes and continued, "I have a purpose. You ran into a strange person on your way here, didn't you?" Right, he was wearing a police uniform. Did you notice?" Silen stared at him and motioned for him to continue. Hoosie pointed at the puddles of sticky liquid on the ground and said, That person was the one who made these things. He was also the one who killed the patrolling prison guard in the warehouse. I don't know who he is, and I don't know if he's even a human. In short, he's a dangerous person. The man touched his 2 curls of Huzi and showed a helpless expression. Originally, I wanted to watch the chaotic battle between the flying snake and the mad owl. Maybe I could take the opportunity to gain some benefits and cause some damage, but I noticed that something was wrong the moment I entered this place. Luckily, I slipped away quickly and avoided danger. That strange person didn't notice me when I hid in the warehouse. About that, I just wanted to test your skills. If you're strong, then we can work together. If you can't even handle those little things, then there's no need for us to work together. If I can't handle those little things, then I'll definitely end up the same as the prison guard in the warehouse. But if I can barely handle those little things, then you'll kill me, won't you? Although it was a question, Silen's words were filled with certainty. Huzi did not deny it. He only shrugged and curled his lip. 2 unknown forces have come to the prison this time, and they're not from Sector S. Also, with their strength, they shouldn't have appeared in the lowest Class A prison. I don't know what kind of bigwigs a mere Class A prison can confine, much less people of their strength. Every single one of them could become a core and important member of even the few famous forces in Sector S. But according to my observations, there is indeed a big shot in this prison from the direction and target of these people's movements. It's just that no one knows about it. Huzi stretched his shoulders. I guess I can be considered a character of some sort. After coming in, I was forced to seek refuge here, waiting for a chance to leave. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, so let's work together. Silen did not directly answer the question of cooperation. Instead, he asked, "You said that there are 2 unknown forces here? And both of them are quite powerful?" Huzi nodded. "Amazing. I feel that any one of them is at least as strong as the people in the 4th-level prison. I suspect that they might destroy this prison this time, so let's work together to escape. You should find someone else. I'm not ready to escape just yet." "What?" Huzi glared at him. "You're courting death. Don't you see the situation clearly? Do you want me to analyze it for you?" Huzi paced back and forth 2 steps, the bunch of braids wrapped in his headscarf swinging back and forth. Suddenly, he paused and looked up at Silen. Then, with a flick of his wrist, a gun appeared in his hand. However, Silen did not attack because of this. This Huzi had no intention of shooting at him. Instead, he aimed the muzzle at the tunnel wall. Puff, puff, puff. 3 shots were fired in a row. The gun was modified so the sound was very soft. Even when it hit the tunnel wall, the sound was much softer. However, its destructive power was not reduced at all. In fact, it was much more destructive than some guns. A normal gun would at most leave a small dent on the tunnel wall, but Huzi's gun opened a deep hole straight away. Although the gun and its destructive power were very attractive, what Silen needed to pay attention to was not this, but the defense system. Generally speaking, the energy fluctuations produced by gunfire would be directly sensed by the defense system. Whether it was a prison guard or someone else, as long as they fired in a non-shooting area, the defense system would sound an alarm and prevent potential threats through the defense system. However, after Huzi fired 3 shots in a row, the tunnel's defense system did not respond at all. Huzi put the gun away and said, "As you can see, the defense system here has not been tampered with, and it's not just the warehouse. The defense system in the area that those people have already passed through has been disabled. Since they made such a big move and did not show any mercy, I speculate that the entire prison might be destroyed in the end." Silen did not answer. Instead, he took out the communicator on his wrist, and it showed that he could not connect. Boom! There was a loud explosion in the distance. Oh no, it's already begun. Hey, hurry up and escape. What are you hesitating for? Your life is more important. Huzi panicked and stomped his feet on the spot. He wanted nothing more than to drag Silen over and forcefully change the thoughts in his mind. Silen was not hesitating. Instead, he was sensing the sound waves hidden in the explosion, sound waves that did not belong to normal humans. Huimao had said that those who were familiar with sound waves could sense the strength of a person through the sound they made. And after sensing the sound waves hidden in the explosion, Silen made up his mind. Those two mysterious forces were really not something he could get involved with right now. Flying Snake, Mad Owl, and the other local forces in the prison should have learned about the new situation through various channels by now. The chaos in the prison cells was getting bigger and bigger. As for Lung, based on Silen's understanding, that guy was very shrewd and would not risk his life. Instead, he would take the opportunity to throw a few bombs to satisfy himself. Come to think of it, those micro-controlled bombs Lung carried were actually very useful right now. Before this, Lung probably did not expect that there would be two forces like this here. That being said, Lung always acted on instinct. Silen looked again at Huzi, who was looking left and right as if sensing for danger around him. In reality, this guy was very capable and his concealment skills were pretty good. He wouldn't have been able to avoid that strange person otherwise. As for which force of Sector S he belonged to, Silen did not have the time to ask right now. Knowing this guy's character, he would not tell the truth anyway. But Silen knew that this guy was not from Flying Snake, Mad Owl, or that he was not from that dangerous force. For now, this guy was not a threat to him. While Huzi was listening to the surroundings with his ears perked up, he suddenly felt that he was being stared at. Noticing Silen's gaze, he took a step back and felt that it was inappropriate. Glaring, he took 2 steps forward and said in a rough voice, "Hey, do you need this long to make a decision? Why are you so hesitant? Are you a man or not?" Silen did not say anything and walked straight towards Huzi. I'm telling you, don't think that I'm afraid to attack you right now. You're not a bad choice when it comes to finding a partner. Worst comes to worst, I'll just find another one." Right now Huzi was a little anxious. He could not figure out Silen's strength, and it was too easy for him to finish off those little monsters. But there was one thing he was absolutely sure of, and that was that he might not be able to beat Silen if they were to fight. Even if he could win, he would have to pay a huge price. In short, the losses outweighed the gains. Adding to the current situation, he did not want to fight Silen at all. But as Silen walked closer and closer, Huzi's hands began to sweat a little inside his gloves. When he was 2 steps away from Huzi, and Huzi was about to fire his gun, Silen spoke up. "Girl, you're blocking the way." A basin of unjust blood was poured out. It was a complete mess. The mustache man felt that his expression was a little broken. Silen bypassed Huzi and walked towards the passage behind Huzi. After a moment of silence, Huzi immediately chased after him. "Hey, how did you know that I'm a woman?" Huzi touched his face. For so many years, no one had been able to recognize his true gender on the first try. One had to know that this disguise was personally made by her master. Silen did not explain. It was not like he could directly tell her, "Girl, I found out that your sex chromosome is XX, right?" Seeing that Silen did not speak again, it was obvious that he did not intend to explain the reason, so Huzi did not waste time asking. Instead, he asked, "Why do we have to go through this passage? It's getting further and further away from the exit." "We'll take a detour. The passage I came from has already been sealed by the prison guards, and they're fighting fiercely over there right now. If we go there, we'll be dragged straight into it," Silen replied. Huzi was not stupid enough to ask why Silen knew about the passage. Instead, he carefully observed the surroundings, holding the gun in his hand, ready to shoot at any time. Silen was also very satisfied with Huzi's reaction. Regardless of how strong she was, at least such a person would not cause too much trouble. Smart people would judge the situation and react accordingly, instead of continuing to waste time asking questions that would not yield an answer. The frequency of the explosions in the distance was getting higher and higher. Now, the prison guards were no longer in the mood to watch the battle in the monitoring room. Everyone in the prison was trapped. Compared to the two mysterious forces, the others would be fine if they did not resist directly. Those two forces had a clear goal, and if it was not necessary, they would not waste time dealing with others. However, those who directly resisted and caused trouble for them, whether it was the local sector forces such as Flying Snakes or Mad Owl, or the prison guards or the prisoners imprisoned here from other sectors, would all end up dead. Although Scylla and the guy dressed as a prison guard had only brushed past each other, it was only a short time before Scylla had a rough estimate. Based on the strength of those prison guards, even if there were capable and ruthless people among them, the two mysterious forces could easily reach this place. It was only natural that they knew the final result of a head-on collision. Right now, Scylla was walking very fast, but his steps were extremely light. Little Mustache was obviously an expert in this area as well. Both of them were moving very fast inside the passageway, but no obvious sound could be heard. Suddenly, Scylla's footsteps came to a halt. After Scylla stopped, Hoozy took a step back and entered a vigilant state. The wall lights in the passage began to flicker at a certain frequency and pattern, creating an illusion of vision. It was as if they were being hypnotized and would cause them to fall into a trance. However, Scylla and Hoozy were obviously not ordinary people. They were able to resist this kind of influence. 1 second, 2 seconds. Suddenly, a person with a metallic luster rushed out from a place 3 meters away from Scylla. His face could not be seen clearly, but it was in the shape of a human. When he rushed towards Scylla, a long spike emerged from the palm of the person's hand and swiftly pierced towards Scylla's face. Meanwhile, Scylla flicked out his wrist blade when the person emerged from the passage wall. Clang! As the metal collided, sparks flew, which were very obvious under the flickering wall lights. The moment the sharp spike pierced, the person stretched out his fist and punched out. Scylla used one leg and at the same time, used the force of the wrist blade being shaken back to twist his body forward. He dodged the person's incoming fist and swung his arm fiercely. With a muffled bang, the person's body was forced down. Before he could get up, Scylla smashed down again and again, not giving him a chance to get up at all. With a series of blows, the person's center of gravity was getting lower and closer to the bottom of the passage. However, this did not mean that the person was at a disadvantage. The person's leg twisted beyond the limit and swept upwards at Scylla. F***ck. He actually wants to kick my lower body. Scylla cursed in his heart. Scylla blocked the attack with his arm and leaped into the air. As he somersaulted, he kicked the man's other leg. When he landed on the ground, he immediately bounced up fiercely and swung his fist at the man. Bang! The person was shaken back a few steps. That pair of eerie, electrifying pupils swept across Scylla and the mustache man. The man swung his arm, and the flying nails came flying straight at Scylla. Scylla used his wrist blade to block the nails that were shooting at him, and the mustache man dodged them pretty quickly. Since the nails were mainly shooting at Scylla, there weren't many that were shooting at the mustache man, and they were all safely avoided by her. After the person threw the nails, he directly entered the passage wall and went far away. Was the person who could blend into the passage wall and walk inside a person? Looking at the nails that were deeply nailed into the passage wall, Hoozy now really regretted it. If she knew that there would suddenly be so many unknown forces and strong people in this prison, she would not have risked her life even if she was beaten to death. Although that person had only exchanged blows with Selene for a very short period of time, only a few seconds, the mustache man was able to see the difference between him and them. Even if the difference wasn't huge, if they were to really fight, she would definitely lose miserably without using her final killing move. After feeling that the person had left, Scylla put away his wrist blade and moved his fist. The person's fist was very hard. Although it seemed that the person who was at a disadvantage when their fists collided, Scylla knew that the person's fist did not cause any damage at all. The solidified fist still could not hurt the person. What kind of physique did the person have? Unlike Huimao's cyborg body, this person was obviously not the same type as Huimao, but he was also very different from ordinary people. When he came into contact with the person during the collision, Scylla had done an analysis. The person's DNA was not the double helix like ordinary people, but a more complicated helix. This kind of gene caused the person to be special. Scylla was now really glad that the person's target this time was not them. It came quickly and left quickly. It was very straightforward. It could be seen that the person did not want to waste too much time here. If he really wanted to fight with his life on the line, he could still fight for a while. Scylla believed that he would not lose during this period of time. Of course, Scylla also knew that this person still had a trump card, but since both sides had a trump card, and the person was in a hurry, he simply left. Killing intent. It came fiercely and quickly, and when it left, it actually disappeared without a trace. This kind of person, Scylla pondered. An assassin? Now, some of the assassin organizations that were listed in some authoritative publications, as long as they were on the list, Scylla had learned about them. He also knew some of the methods and preferences of the various assassin organizations from some of the seniors in the Hunter group. However, Schotten had once revealed that the top assassin organizations in the League of Stars were not on the list. This was because these authoritative publications could not estimate their combat power and did not rank them. Those that were truly hidden in the big world were the most dangerous. Who is that person? Is he human? Is he in cahoots with that strange person from before? Huzi asked after letting out a long sigh. He is human, but I don't know which of the two forces he is from, Scylla replied. Huzi pressed on the tunnel wall and confirmed that the tunnel wall here was normal. He seemed to be surprised that the person could directly pass through the tunnel wall. I've heard of such a person before, but I didn't expect to see it with my own eyes, Huzi said with a sigh. All right, let's leave quickly. Who knows, the next time we meet someone with a bad temper, he might just use a killer move to eliminate us. Hearing Scylla's words, Huzi touched the two tufts of mustache at the side of his mouth. Although it was not a real mustache, it was a habit he had after disguising himself. A killer move. To be honest, if it wasn't for this little life of mine, I really want to go over there and watch their battle. This is a battle between true experts, Huzi said. How could Scylla not want to? However, after seeing it, he had to be alive to come out. If there was any big secret in there, the result would not be as good as just now. In the end, it would be a situation of certain death. What was the purpose of these two mysterious people? For example, the person just now was only one of the two mysterious forces. If the people from both sides were of such a special kind, and the person they met just now was only a person who did not stand out from the others, then what kind of combat power would the people from both sides have together? Scylla did not know the specific extent of such combat power, but he knew that such combat power was more than enough to destroy this prison. Scylla sighed. Sure enough, his ability was not enough. After Scylla and Huzi left, an eye suddenly appeared on the wall of the passage where they were just now. After moving a little, it closed again and disappeared. Gunshots and explosions were heard everywhere in the prison. The flying snakes were slightly better off. CGU's order made the flying snakes in the prison prepare in advance. They did not continue to deal with the crazy owl people. As soon as they found that something was wrong, the person in charge of the small group in the prison asked everyone to leave the prison decisively, even if they had to come back to stay for a few years. The most important thing was to stay alive now. In a surveillance room of the prison, a person stood in front of the surveillance screen. He was wearing a cloak and a hat, and his face could not be seen clearly. Next to this person, a few dead prison guards were lying there, gradually melting. Chapter 172. The man in the cloak quietly looked at the screen. It was the surveillance footage of the cells. The cells were now in a mess. The original riot had heated up. Perhaps they themselves didn't know why it had developed to this state, but as the fight went on, it went beyond their original plan. They couldn't control it, and they didn't want to stop. They couldn't stop either. The prisoners' eyes were bloodshot. The ground was covered in blood. Those who weren't dead were lying on the ground and being stepped on back and forth. They were like a group of maniacs who didn't feel any pain. Their self-consciousness was gradually replaced. In their eyes there was only killing and killing. The virus had already invaded. The virus would make people overly excited, crazy, and bloodthirsty. Especially the sound of explosions and the smell of blood, it was easier to stimulate their nerve cells. The man in the cloak looked at the surveillance footage. He seemed to be very serious. He didn't miss a single detail on the screen. He seemed to be looking for something. Suddenly, an eye appeared on the wall of the surveillance room. Then, a human figure slowly separated from the wall. It was similar to the strange man Silen encountered before. They were both people who could blend into the wall. The only difference was that this person only had one eye. "You still haven't found it?" the man in the cloak asked. "No, the people of Wuxia are very cunning. They don't seem to be in a hurry to find hidden." Seeing that the man in the cloak didn't say anything, the one-eyed man continued, "While tracking them, I found two special people. They shouldn't be from the prison, but they can fight against the people of Wuxia. Don't worry about the others. Keep looking. As long as they aren't from Wuxia, don't waste time." "Yes." After saying that, the one-eyed man blended into the wall again and left. The man in the cloak was left behind to continue looking at the surveillance footage. Silen and Huzi were still wandering in the tunnel. According to Silen's understanding of the layout of this prison, they would be able to find the exit if they went around this tunnel. However, this tunnel was very long and curved. There would be a fork in the middle that led to the cells. The most dangerous part was there. "I felt like I was being watched," the mustache man said as he carefully looked around. "But that feeling is gone now." Silen had the same feeling. When he was fighting with the strange man, he felt that there was a fourth person watching from the side. It seemed that the strange man did not want to continue fighting with Silen because of this and was in a hurry to leave. From the looks of it, the strange man and the person watching them in the dark should belong to two different forces. However, they didn't look like they were going to fight. What were they trying to do? They were close to the fork in the road, and Silen had already sensed that someone was coming from there. Without Silen saying anything, Huzi had already taken out his gun and was ready. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. From the sound of it, it was obvious that it wasn't the strange people, but the prisoners in the prison. Right now, the cells were in a mess. Explosions rang out one after another, so it wasn't strange for the prisoners to run out. However, when Silen saw these prisoners, he knew that something was wrong. Their eyes were red, and they were holding sticks, daggers, and even guns. The prisoners' eyes were bloodshot, and they looked like lunatics. When they saw Silen and Huzi, they rushed over. It was a wonder why these prisoners had so many knives and guns. Was the prison's management so bad? But when he thought about it, it was normal. They were all from the same sector, so the prison guards turned a blind eye to them. Dodging the bullets, Silen neatly dealt with the prisoners who pounced on him. Silen noticed that a few of the prisoners also had the flying snake tattoo on their back. For the sake of Tsijiu, Silen only knocked them out. However, if this prisoner went too far, Silen wouldn't hold back. Sensing Silen's movements, Huzi, who was originally prepared to kill, changed his momentum and kicked the prisoner in front of him until he fainted. Huzi thought, "So this guy is from the flying snake." But when did the flying snake have such a powerful person? She knew all the more powerful people among her peers. She knew about the famous flying snake and black snake among the younger generation of the flying snake, but she was sure that she had never seen the young man beside her. Although Silen had disguised himself, Huzi was sure that this person was about his age. However, it was better to make friends with such a person. Besides, they were now in a cooperative relationship. No matter what, he had to give her some face. In that case, he would go easy on the prisoners from the flying snake. At least, he wouldn't kill those within her control. Shouldn't he thank him? Scylla looked at a prisoner from the flying snake, who was knocked out by Huzi, and then looked at Huzi. Huzi stroked his beard with his thumb and raised his chin. What he meant was, "See, I'm giving you face." If it was just a prisoner, Scylla could still easily deal with them. What Scylla was paying attention to now was the virus carried by these prisoners. This kind of virus, if a person's physique was strong, could produce some antibodies to resist it. To avoid it, one must have a strong will. Otherwise, if one slacked off before the antibodies were produced, the virus would take advantage of the weakness and enter the body. Then, one would be as crazy as these crazy prisoners. This kind of madness would keep them excited, and continuous excitement would consume a lot of physical strength. It would only end when the energy in the body was exhausted. Huzi directly kicked the neck of a flying snake who rushed over. Looking at the momentum, if he used a little more strength, the poor guy's head would be separated from his body. However, the few people in front of this person were not from the flying snake. Subconsciously, Huzi killed them without mercy. However, looking at the way these people died, he shot them in the head. Scylla looked at Huzi. She seemed to have some symptoms now. Her eyes had already turned red. Seeing Scylla looking over, Huzi's expression changed. She seemed to regret what happened just now. She didn't pay attention and directly kicked them. Originally, she wanted to save some strength. How could she kick them to death? Taking the gun from a prisoner's hand, he killed the few people in front of him with a few shots. Taking advantage of this gap, Scylla said to Huzi, "They are infected by the virus. This virus will make people crazy and stimulate their murderous nature. Be careful, don't be completely infected." Hearing Scylla's words, Huzi was shocked. She quickly adjusted her mind and suppressed the bloodthirsty excitement in her mind. The closer they got to the fork, the more prisoners they encountered. The passage here was full of prisoners who killed each other. However, looking at the situation, these prisoners had just arrived here. They had to hurry up. Otherwise, when a large number of prisoners came, it would be difficult to deal with them. It was fine to deal with one or two, but to deal with hundreds of them was purely looking for trouble. Boom! There was another big explosion. What was different from before was that this explosion was not far from where they were. Scylla suddenly had an extremely dangerous feeling. That was not something he could deal with. "Run!" Scylla roared. Scylla sped up. Now he couldn't care about which side was blocking the road in front of him. If they blocked him to death, Scylla's own life could not be guaranteed now. Who would care about which side they were from? What's more, Flying Snake was not all Tsijiu's men. Tsijiu should have asked his men to leave here, right? Even if it was Tsijiu's men, those who did not have time to leave basically had little hope of survival. They could not resist the virus and killed each other around them, not to mention the two strong forces. Now they did not see the prison guards. It was estimated that most of the prison guards had been killed. Although every prison, even if it was a first-class prison, had powerful guards, after all, there would always be strong people. The two forces that came were really not something they could deal with. Scylla could not count on the prison guards now. He could only rely on himself. Scylla felt a lot more at ease when he heard a distant explosion earlier. That explosion was caused by Lung's microbomb, and judging from the sound, Scylla was certain that Lung should be near the exit right now. If he couldn't even escape like that, then he wouldn't be worthy of being a member of the Andrea family. Seeing that Scylla had increased his speed, the mustache man dared to keep up with him. He took out a folded longsword and cut down all the prisoners blocking the way. Since Scylla didn't care who was blocking the way, then she wouldn't care either. The sense of danger was getting stronger and stronger. Scylla did not know why he had such a strong feeling. Although he did not see the other side, Scylla knew that he was definitely not a match for the other side. This was not a gap that could be overcome with 1 or 2 guns. Soon, he was almost at the fork. Boom! At the fork, the sudden explosion killed all the prisoners around it. This was not an ordinary bomb. The core area of the explosion was filled with flames. Even the walls of the fork were gradually deformed by the flames. Fortunately, Scylla did not come to the fork in the road. The moment they sensed the abnormality, Scylla and the mustache man swiftly stopped running forward and flew backward. Otherwise, they would also be affected by the flames. The explosion and flames further agitated the prisoners outside of this area. They rushed over from the other side of the fork. Scylla and Huzi did not have time to stay here. They identified one of the tunnels and rushed over. In the passageway that led to the prison cells, which was also the point of origin of the explosion, rays of blue light that were as straight as blades emerged from the flames. Then, a figure gradually walked out from the flames. It was a blue-skinned woman. Her eyes were similar to the blue blades in her hands, cold and emotionless. The flames did not seem to have any effect on her. Seeing the prisoners rushing over, the woman waved the blue blades in her hands and easily split the prisoners that were rushing over. The woman did not seem to care about these prisoners. The place where her eyes landed was the direction where Scylla was. If he did not run now, then when? Scylla rushed toward that tunnel. Huzi did not want to fall behind. Run for your life. The woman did not look like a good person. If he could not beat her, he would definitely run. The woman's steps became faster and faster. The prisoners in front of her were like pieces of tofu. They were easily split apart without making a sound. Scylla now really hated how these prisoners were so weak. Suddenly, he felt a chill behind him. Scylla exerted force on his feet and dodged to the side. At the same time, the wrist blade on his arm popped out. Bang! The wrist knife that was worth $500,000 that the card had always cherished was broken with a resounding sound. It was a clean cut. F***CK. The wrist blade that was worth half a second didn't even last half a second. He dodged the blue blade that was coming at him. It seemed to be a special energy weapon. However, Scylla had never seen it before. The blue blades were connected to the woman's hand, and the woman was indeed not a robot. Scylla did not have time to think about the problem here. The woman had already targeted them. After retreating, Scylla and Huzi stood 2 steps away from each other and faced the woman who was chasing them. She did not look behind her. After slashing a prisoner that was rushing over, the woman walked towards Scylla and Huzi. Scylla and Huzi briefly exchanged a look. If they could not hide, then they would fight. There was no other way. Just as Scylla was about to make a move, a beeping alarm sounded. This was the alarm of the prison's core defense system. It was reasonable to say that the defense system that had its command program tampered with should not sound an alarm, unless the entire prison had reached a critical level and the terminal command for the final position was activated. Because that command could not be tampered with, once it was changed, the prison would forcibly activate the destruction program. Therefore, when the 2 forces were still operating in the prison, they would not touch the terminal command. If that was the case, there was only the first explanation. What kind of power could cause the entire prison to be in such a critical situation? There was no time for Scylla to think too much. The countdown to the exit was about to close. Without saying anything, Scylla and Huzi rushed toward the exit with almost all their strength. The woman paused in place for a moment. It was this short pause that allowed Scylla and Huzi to rush to the exit. At this time, the countdown to the exit had reached 0. However, as soon as Scylla's feet touched the ground, he was pulled back by a powerful suction force, as if a large hand was forcibly pulling him back. He could not resist at all. He could not resist. No matter how hard he struggled, it was futile. The suction force dragged Scylla back to the other side, and the passageway began to close. When Scylla was dragged back, a whip wrapped around Scylla's arm. Huzi wanted to pull Scylla out, but the suction force was too strong. Instead, it pulled Hoosie over. However, as the exit closed, the whip was also clamped off. Hoosie stared blankly at the broken whip. Then, she looked at the closed door with a complicated expression. Although they had only worked together for a short time, less than an hour, she had a good impression of this person. If this person could get out, she would definitely invite him to Fire Phoenix as a guest. Fire Phoenix was one of the great forces of Sector S on the same level as Flying Snake and Mad Owl. However, this area was not Fire Phoenix's territory. Hoosie had only snuck out to watch the show because he heard that Flying Snake and Mad Owl were going to fight. Who would have thought that he would run into this mess and almost lose his life? Sighing, Hoosie turned around and left. This prison was not far from destruction. Speaking of which, Scylla was not the end after he was pulled back by the suction force. This was just the beginning. Everyone in the passageway, including the woman with the blue light knife, was forcefully pulled towards the other side of the passageway. However, in the next moment, an even greater and opposite force suddenly appeared, and Scylla was smacked back like a ball that had been tossed over a racket. The superposition of the two forces resulted in an enormous impact, and Scylla was sent flying like a ball that had been hit by a racket. He could even clearly hear a series of cracking sounds coming from his body. His bones were broken. As for how badly they were broken, Scylla no longer had the energy to check. He only knew that he was in for real this time. The sudden change in pressure and impact had not only broken all the bones in Scylla's body, blood also flowed out of his nose, ears and mouth. The surface of his body had also split open like parched earth, and blood flowed out of it. After he slammed heavily against the closed passageway door and fell powerlessly to the ground, Scylla felt that it was incredibly difficult for him to even move. He turned his head with great effort and looked at the woman who had also been sent flying not far away. It was truly a heavy blow. They were both hit, and he was half dead, but the woman spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood and got up again. She was even in a fighting state and headed towards the other side of the passageway. Her head seemed to be injured as well. As she was lying on her side, the blood that flowed out flowed down and into her eyes. What was this feeling? He didn't know, but Scylla was now numb. He didn't know if it was because his nerves were damaged, but he couldn't feel any pain. Only his eyes were bloodshot. The air seemed to have become heavier, and breathing was very difficult. However, Scylla knew that this was because his lungs were injured. Other than his lungs, his internal organs had probably suffered considerable damage, right? Would he die? Scylla didn't close his eyes and kept looking at the other end of the passageway. It was very blurry, and he could only see the blurry flashing blue blades of light. Who was that woman fighting with? He couldn't see clearly, he really couldn't. Scylla tried, but even those blue blades of light gradually disappeared, leaving behind only darkness. He couldn't see or move, but Scylla could faintly hear some sounds. It was the sound of fighting just now, and then after a bang there was a moment of silence. Then, it was followed by intense fighting, and then it stopped again. Just when Scylla thought that there was no one left, 2 voices rang beside him. Scylla could only vaguely make out a few things. Still breathing, left, explosion. Although the entire prison hadn't been completely destroyed, it was still riddled with holes. It no longer looked like a prison, but an abandoned refugee camp. Inside the prison, be it the passageways, the cells or the surveillance room, everything was covered in blood. Of the tens of thousands of prison guards, less than 100 had survived. Moreover, not a single one of them had seen anyone from either of the 2 forces. Perhaps that was why they were able to survive. Who would have thought that a Grade 1 prison that had always been hailed as a regional force, a place where both the prison guards and the prisoners belonged to Sector S itself, would be almost completely destroyed. This incident had affected many of the major forces in Sector S led by Flying Snake and Mad Owl. Every prison guard in Sector S had been alerted. Since the prison guards of this prison were almost completely wiped out, would they be next? Meanwhile, the garrison of Sector S had also begun to move. After this incident was over, all parties began to move step by step. All the prisons in Sector S, from Grade 1 to Grade 5, began to be reorganized. However, reorganizing during this sensitive period would inevitably trigger a series of incidents. It was this Grade 1 prison incident that became the fuse that ignited the beginning of Sector S's chaos. Chapter 173. Outside this Class 1 prison planet, on Lung's starship, Huimao was no longer in the mood to teach that little Cerberus how to speak. Right now, Huimao was feeling abnormally restless, pacing back and forth on a table in the control room. The little Cerberus was sprawled on a chair, staring wide-eyed at Huimao, who was pacing back and forth. He had no idea what was going on, but he could sense the restlessness of this little cat, so he obediently lay there without making a sound. If he didn't know what was good for him, he would probably attract a merciless paw from this cat. When teaching the little fellow how to speak and read, if the little fellow's performance did not satisfy Huimao would often slap it with his paw. But the good thing was that this Cerberus little fellow's intelligence wasn't bad, and he learned very quickly. Education under the cat's paw was rather effective. But just now, Huimao had suddenly lost the mood to teach, and had rushed to the control room and paced back and forth. Something had happened, something had definitely happened. Lung did not close the control room, so Huimao could enter and exit freely. Besides, there was still a large group of robots here, so Lung was not worried that something would happen here. After pacing a few rounds, Huimao stopped in his tracks, as if he had made up his mind about something. He crouched down and faced the control panel. The cat's eyes began to turn green. Unlike the green in the Cerberus little fellow's eyes, the green in the cat's eyes was like a green fluorescence in the darkness. There were some slight pulsations like a combination of programs and code. Following the appearance of the green in the cat's eyes, the buttons on the control panel in front of the cat began to flash, and images popped up one after another on the screen. The image of the planet was zoomed in, and zoomed in again. Looking at the unrecognizable prison on the screen, Huimao's whiskers trembled. He continued to enlarge the image, and then began to search, conducting a deep scan and life detection. However, to Huimao's disappointment, the prison was littered with corpses, and most of them were incomplete. There were prisoners and prison guards, and judging from the extent of the damage to the prison, it wasn't just caused by a bomb. Furthermore, judging from the wounds on the bodies of those who had already died, the ones who killed them were a group of very powerful people, but they were definitely not Lung or Silen. Huimao knew Silen very well, so he could tell from the wounds whether it was Silen's doing or not. All the screens in the control room were switching between different images almost in a flash, but the gray cat was watching them with unusual focus. If someone were to see this scene, they would definitely suspect that the cat was just putting on an act. Not far away, two beautiful robots were watching the situation. Although they still had perfect smiles on their faces, their eyes were also flashing, recording everything in front of them. Huimao was aware of the surveillance of these robots, but he didn't stop them. He didn't have the mind to care about it now, because he could no longer contact Lung and Silen. Lung and Silen had both brought emergency communication devices with them before they left, as well as the latest tracking device developed by the Andrira family, but now, Huimao finally found a tracking point, but for some reason, the signal was very weak. Although the signal was very weak, Huimao still knew that this signal belonged to Lung, and judging from the movement and signal reflection of this signal, Lung was still alive. However, Silen still couldn't find him, and there was no signal response. He found Lung's location, but he couldn't contact him. It was probably because the communication device on Lung was broken. It was at this moment Huimao noticed that some starships and spaceplanes were flying towards this planet. They didn't belong to the government, but belonged to the local forces. There were symbols on the starships and spaceplanes, and one of them was the icon of flying snake. Right now, these forces didn't cause trouble for each other, and they didn't have the time or energy to care about their old grudges. They had also noticed the chaos and crisis in Sector S this time. Before this, they thought that as long as the foreign forces didn't interfere with their own sector's matters, they would turn a blind eye to it. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing to cooperate with them when necessary, but the events that happened on this planet had far exceeded their expectations. There were hundreds of thousands of prisoners and tens of thousands of prison guards in the entire prison, and less than 1% of them had escaped. The high defense prison system was almost completely paralyzed, and the defense system's weapon systems were destroyed almost before they could do anything. The specially made prison walls and passageways were all destroyed beyond recognition. This was just a Grade 1 prison, and it shouldn't be within the infiltration range of any foreign forces. If it was damaged to such an extent, then what about the other high-level prisons? If the prison planet of Sector S suffered such damage every second, then what kind of blow would the local forces suffer? At the very least, they would feel like there was a thorn stuck in their throat. All the surveillance cameras inside the prison had been destroyed, and all the surveillance records had been destroyed. There was no way to recover them at all. Many of the defense system's cannon barrels had been forcefully twisted off or melted by high temperature. Even if the prison guards wanted to activate the weapons system here, they wouldn't be able to do anything. But how could the prison defense system's weapons be so easily twisted off and melted? Then who was the culprit behind all of this? It didn't matter if the culprit had done this with their own abilities or special weapons, it was enough to prove one thing. These people had come prepared. Right now, the forces of Sector S couldn't care less about their internal strife against the unknown force that had come prepared. Right now, they were prepared to unite against the enemy. On this side, flying snakes and mad owls had been ordered by their superiors to set aside their disputes and investigate the matter as soon as possible. Their superiors would send some reinforcements. CGU was leading his men in a firefight against mad owls. Just as he was about to carry out the final cleanup, he suddenly received news from the prison on the other side. At the same time, his superiors had also issued an order to cease fire immediately. It wasn't a discussion, it was an order. The few old men above him who didn't care about internal affairs for the past few years had issued the order at once. Although Tsijiu was unwilling, he had no choice but to obey. Moreover, he had a feeling that something especially serious must have happened in the prison. When he thought of the message Silen had sent him earlier, Tsijiu immediately stopped what he was doing and led his men to the prison planet. It was because Silen had sent them a message earlier stating that an unknown force had come to the prison, and that the enemy was so strong that even the prison guards had been killed. Therefore, for safety's sake, Tsijiu had told the prison's people to stay vigilant at all times and evacuate as soon as they discovered anything unusual. This was also the main reason why flying snakes had evacuated the most people from the prison. When Tsijiu arrived on the planet, he asked about the situation. The security zone only existed in name now, and there were forces everywhere searching for survivors from the prison. Tsijiu then asked about Silen Helong, but no one knew anything about him. It didn't take long before two flying snakes people carried Lung over. Lung didn't look like he was in a good state, but he still looked a little spirited. "Hey, flying snakes, any news about Silen?" Lung asked. Tsijiu shook his head. Lung was carried to the airship's emergency room, but he didn't let the medical staff do anything too complicated. After treating his wounds, he went to Tsijiu's side. After leaving the prison, he didn't have the time to run far before he was knocked unconscious by a strange vibration. When he woke up, he was still a little unsteady on his feet. When he saw the flying snakes people, he asked them to send him here, but he was much better now. Right now, Tsijiu didn't know much. There wasn't much useful information that could be found in the prison. Lung asked Tsijiu about the current situation in the prison, but it was said that no one had been found alive yet. Right now, the people around CGU were busy contacting the people who had arrived at various places in the prison. They wanted to understand the situation in the prison, but the information they received was more frightening than the last. Right now, Lung was also very annoyed. The camouflage suit he gave to Silen would have a signal response as long as there was only a tenth of it left, but now there was no signal at all. However, Lung believed that Silen was still alive. Just as Lung and CGU were talking about the situation in the prison, the people around them who were busy contacting suddenly found that all the signals from their communicators had been cut off. What happened? CGU turned around and asked. The signal has suddenly been cut off. I can't get through. Same here. However, in this situation, only a few people within 10 meters of them were affected. The communicators of those further away were still working fine. Just as CGU was about to ask them to go a little further to try, the communicators of these people suddenly made a rhythmic beeping sound in unison. Then, there was a voice filled with anger and impatience. Lung, talk. There was only a voice, no image. CGU felt that this voice was rather familiar. When he saw Lung hurriedly grab the communicator of the person closest to him, he recalled that it was that Hui Mao. Wheeze, do you have any news from Silen? Lung asked hurriedly. Meow meow. I'm so far away, why would I hear anything? There's no GPS signal at all, not at all. Hui Mao roared. The few people nearby who were holding their communicators hurriedly moved them a little further away. I haven't found any GPS signal on his body either. Lung rubbed his face in irritation. Have your robot send me over. I'll go look for him. Hearing Hui Mao's words, Lung was stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted and quickly gave orders to the robots on the starship. After verifying Lung's identity remotely, one of the beautiful robots in the control room brought Hui Mao to a small flying vehicle. The little hellhound wanted to follow as well, and Hui Mao didn't object. Now that there were more people, there would be more help. It wasn't that Hui Mao looked down on the other people on the planet, but that those people didn't satisfy Hui Mao at all. They were all weak like little chicks that could be swatted to death with a single claw. What could he hope for? He should have gone with Silen back then, but now he regretted it. This was the first time he had seen so many unfamiliar humans. Even though there was no scent of prey, the little hellhound was still extremely vigilant. Almost the moment the cabin door opened and he smelled the large number of unfamiliar scents outside, the little hellhound bared his teeth habitually, releasing a low growl from his throat. However, he hadn't howled for long before he was slapped to a stop by Hui Mao's claw. What are you howling for? Follow me. The little guy twitched his nose, and only then did he tentatively step out of the flying vehicle. He was still on all fours, but better than before, he was wearing clothes. In order to meet this little guy's standards, Silen even made a hole in his pants to release his tail. A cat and a half-dog man. When such a combination appeared, it attracted a lot of attention. However, everyone here was from the flying snake, and with CGU's reminder, they wouldn't make too much of a commotion. Hui Mao didn't delay. After seeing Lung, he raised his tail and prepared to run towards the prison. It was Lung who borrowed CGU's flying vehicle to bring these two fellows to the prison. As he didn't know which part of the prison Silen was in, he didn't stop the flying vehicle after reaching the prison. Instead, he slowly flew around the prison. With Hui Mao and the little hellhound's nose, he believed that this would be more effective. Silen didn't know what was happening outside. He was currently in a special state, a state he was very familiar with. It was the same feeling he had when he was tied to an experiment table in the underground laboratory of Planet Brown Earth's slums in Sector X. The familiar pain that drilled into his bones. His fingers trembled, his entire body convulsed, and all his blood flowed irregularly. Every moment was challenging the limits of his nerves, and his thoughts were almost instantly scattered. However, after a short blank period, Silen painstakingly gathered his mind again. He knew that if his mind was scattered and his mind was blank, he might never wake up again. Every moment, Silen's nerves would be assaulted by a pain that was greater than the previous moment. Then, Silen would try his best to focus his mind. His mind and spirit must not be scattered. If they were scattered, it would be over. The familiar pain and experience reminded Silen of the knob on the control device. The knob had been twisted to 350 degrees. According to the chip's activation rate, it should have been forcefully activated to more than 97% at that time. Right now, Silen could clearly feel that the activation rate had increased yet again. The activation rate of the chip injected by Ori was easy at first, but it became harder and harder as it progressed. At the time, Silen was forcefully activated to a little over 97%, and that was already an extreme. Although his genes had evolved and his physique was much stronger now, it didn't mean that the chip could be activated that much. Silen was trying to touch that extreme, and with his current physique, where was the new extreme? During his attempts, Silen seemed to see those chips. He captured one of them, enlarged it, and analyzed the current activation rate of the chip. These chips were embedded in his genes and replicated in sync with the genes inside his body. However, they would automatically degrade and lose their activity after they were three-dimensional. They would only be active when they were inside Silen's body. Silen could see the interaction bonds between the molecules on the chips that were similar to the genes in his body. They were broken and connected to another place, and there were also the interactions of electrons on the molecules. The changes of the chips embedded in the genes caused a series of changes in the chemical and non-chemical bonds of the original DNA. Originally, these forces were the factors that formed the double helix structure of the DNA, but because of their changes, the DNA helix structure in Silen's body was also gradually changing. Thinking of the previous analysis of the DNA helix situation in the strange person's body, Silen suddenly thought that even if the structure was not as complicated as the strange person's, because of the activation of the chip, the original DNA helix structure had some changes. Although these changes were not too drastic, would it also produce some special ability? Limit. Silen finally felt the limit. When he saw the changes on the chip were no longer stable, he knew that he had reached the critical point of the activation. If he continued, not only would he not be able to activate the chip, but he would also die. Wake up, it's time to stop. Suddenly opening his eyes, Silen breathed rapidly, like a suffocating person finally coming into contact with air. The pain all over his body was still very obvious, but it did not feel like the pain caused by broken bones or internal injuries. This feeling was very similar to the feeling after the end of the activation experiment, but this time it was more serious. He could not even get up immediately after waking up. Silen lay on the ground and opened his eyes to look around. It was still the same tunnel, next to the exit door of the tunnel. The tunnel was very dark, and all the wall lights were off. However, there were arrows marked with light storage materials in the tunnel, so people could find the direction of the exit even when there was no power. Logically speaking, there should be many such arrows in the tunnel, but in fact, this was not the case. Most of the light energy contained in the light storage materials seemed to have been absorbed, and only the tip of the arrow closest to the door still had a little light. With this little light, Silen could also see the situation in the tunnel. Unlike the passageway before he fainted, the current passageway looked like it had been forcibly enlarged and then compressed. The cracks and creases on the walls of the passageway were proof that something had happened while Silen was unconscious. Now the top of the tunnel was half a meter away from Silen, and Silen would hit the top even if he sat up. The tunnel more than 10 meters away was like a pipe that was flattened from top to bottom, and that part of the road was sealed. Forget it, before I recover my strength, I'll just lie like this. Because there were cracks in the tunnel wall, the tunnel was not completely sealed. There was still a little air coming in, but it was enough. After all, in this small section of the tunnel, there was only Silen. The camouflage suit on his body was also torn. Silen closed his eyes and no longer cared about it. In his mind, he recalled the sound and feeling he heard before he fainted completely. At that time, there was a strong magnetic field change, air pressure change, and the temperature rose more than 50 degrees in a second. Then, it dropped below 0 degrees. At that time, he couldn't see anything, only the sound of fighting and strange gunshots. Every gun had its own characteristics when shooting. Bullets would have a special shock wave, and the stimulator type would have a specific energy wave. At that time, the wave that Silen felt was very strange. Silen had never felt that kind of wave before. It was not a pure bullet type, nor was it a pure stimulator type. Although he was in a daze at that time, he clearly remembered the wave when it touched the surface of his body. Now that he was awake, Silen recalled it. If he had the opportunity to encounter it again in the future, he would definitely be able to point it out. As for the two voices, Silen remembered them as well. He didn't know if he would have the chance to see them again in the future. At this time, Huimao's nose twitched. He jumped down from the flying car and ran in a certain direction. Lung hurriedly chased after him. When the little hellhound saw Huimao jump down, it also jumped down. Then, it ran behind Huimao on all fours. With every step, its claws would leave a claw mark on the roof of the prison. Chapter 174. Huimao's speed was very fast, and he did not stop at all. He ran straight in that direction, all the way until he reached a breach in the prison. There was a hole there caused by the explosion at the top of the prison. Huimao jumped in, and the little Cerberus followed closely behind. Lung parked the flying car beside it and hurriedly followed. The power supply inside had all been destroyed, and after entering, everything was shrouded in darkness. Lung took out a few levitating energy lamps, and with the illumination of these energy lamps, the surroundings were clearly displayed. There were already dead people everywhere. Most of them were prisoners, as there were not many prison guards in this area. Lung looked at the state of these people's death. Some had died from fighting each other, while others had been killed in one blow. It was very neat. It was very likely that the people from those two factions were the ones who killed them with a single strike. Lung sighed. Why did he have to meet people from both sides at this time? If he had known that those two forces would appear here, he would not have risked his life to come here. However, who would have thought that those two forces at the top of the League of Stars would come to this insignificant Level 1 prison planet? After making a few turns, Huimao jumped down to the lower level, and his nose twitched as he continued running. Not only Huimao, but the little Cerberus had also smelled Silen's aura. "Wheeze, how is it?" Lung asked as he ran. "There's Silen's aura, but there's also some unfamiliar aura, a very strange aura," Huimao said without turning his head back. Not long after, Huimao arrived at the warehouse and sneezed. "What a disgusting smell," Huimao said as he shook his beard. The little Cerberus clearly felt the same. He came to a sticky puddle of water not far away, frowned and bared his fangs as he turned around, then shook his head and left. "I've encountered these things before," Lung said. "Those were the traces left behind by the death of those rat-like beasts." Wheeze ignored Lung and stared at a certain direction in the passageway. Silen had come from that direction, and there was a very disgusting aura heading in that direction as well. From the looks of it, Silen had probably run into that guy before. The little hellhound walked to a corner and growled. "A woman," Huimao sniffed and said. "This woman left with Silen." "Women? Serene, this guy is really—" "They went that way." The gray cat straightened its tail and ran towards the other side of the passageway. Lung brought up the layout of the prison, and according to the layout, Lung could more or less guess Silen's escape route. Huimao stopped at a corner of the tunnel. That was where Silen and the strange man who could melt into the wall fought. It was also where the eye appeared. Although he believed that Silen was still alive, Lung was still very uneasy. After all, it was not fun to run into those two forces head-on, and he could lose his life if he was the slightest bit careless. Fortunately, he didn't find any traces of Silen's blood here. Following the scent, Hui Mao continued his search. Gradually, the number of corpses began to increase, especially at the forks. Moreover, many of them had been cut in half with a single slash. Hui Mao also mentioned a few special scents. Special scents meant special people, people who were different from the average human. In other words, there were a few people who came from those two forces. Lung looked at the corpses around him. All of their bones were broken, especially those who were already dead and had no power to resist. Almost all of their bones were shattered and their muscles were torn. They lay limply on the ground like a ball of paste, and their bodies were deformed. Upon closer inspection, many of them were turned into this by some kind of power after they died. If it wasn't for the outer layer of skin, it would be hard for them to maintain their human form. Lung had recorded everything he saw along the way. He would analyze it when he had time outside, and it was also an important piece of information that he could pass on to the other Andrira family members who had come to Sector S. Other than that, Lung also noticed that Hui Mao and the little hellhound's fur were standing on end. It wasn't because they were in any danger, but because they sensed that an extremely powerful fellow had once stayed here. Hui Mao found a passage and ran inside. He's right here. He was very excited at first, but he didn't run far before he realized that the passage was growing narrower and narrower. In fact, a certain part of the passage had been squashed flat, and the top and bottom had merged together. Silin, meow if you're still alive! Hui Mao roared. In fact, Silin had noticed Hui Mao and the others a long time ago. He had heard their footsteps, and the cat's footsteps were all too familiar to him. There was also Lung's, and there was also the sound of claws grinding against the ground. It should be the little hellhounds. When he heard Hui Mao's meow, Silin gave him a very respectful meow. Hui Mao's ears twitched. Although Silin's meow was very unpleasant to hear, it was good that he was still alive. Also, judging from his meow, his injuries shouldn't be too serious. Lung was relieved now. He sat down not far away because the passage was too narrow for him to come over. I'm going to dig in directly. Is there a problem? Hui Mao asked again. He was afraid that something would go wrong if he dug too hard. Go ahead, Silin said. Silin could move his arms now, but he still felt a little weak. Not to mention that he couldn't stand up in this space. Hui Mao began to scratch at the surrounding walls with his claws, and the little hellhound did the same. Lung sat on the ground and looked at the two of them. The corner of his mouth twitched. He looked at his hand and shook his head with a sigh. What a difference! Not long after, a hole was dug through the flattened wall. Hui Mao crawled over to look at Silin, who was lying on the ground. He sniffed Silin's body and patted it with his claws. After confirming that there were no fatal injuries, he jumped onto Silin's head and began to scratch Silin's hair. See, you really can't do it without me. Hui Mao patted Silin's face with all his might, and as if venting his anger, he scratched Silin's already messy hair even more. Silin smiled and raised his hand to scratch Hui Mao's chin. He pointed at the closed door and said, Good boy, go. There's another door here. Keep digging. Hui Mao snorted and raised his tail high. He slowly walked to the door and started digging. The hellhound expanded the hole that Hui Mao had dug earlier so that he and Lung could pass through. When Lung crawled out of the hole, he looked at Silin, who was lying on the ground, and pushed him. Bro, the space is too small. Let's hurry up and get out. Silin looked at Lung, who was crawling over, and said, Wait, I don't have the strength right now. Then let's rest for 10 minutes. There shouldn't be any danger for now. Lung flipped over and lay on the ground. He kicked Silin. Hey, that cat said you were with a girl. Where's that girl? Silin pointed outside the door. She went out. So disloyal? That won't do. I can't trust the girl you found. Her taste isn't as good as mine. Lung said cockily. Although he said that, there was a hint of killing intent in his word. It's not her problem. I rushed out the door with her, but I was dragged back by a force. She wanted to pull me out, but it was already too late. As he said that, Silen pointed at a whip that had been snapped off by the door. A force? Lung's attention was diverted. Are they from those two forces? How do you know it's those two forces? After a pause, Silen asked again. Do you know where they came from? Lung let out a long sigh and put his arm behind his head. If I'm not mistaken, it should be those two top-notch assassin organizations that have never been on the assassin ranking, Mist and Wuxia. Silen had guessed that it was an assassin organization, but he did not know much about the Mist and Wuxia that Lung mentioned. Lung also indicated that he wasn't too sure. After all, they've already been quiet for 50 years. After that incident 50 years ago, these two top-notch assassin organizations actually vanished without a trace. It's really puzzling, because there were no traces of either of them in that incident. Of course, it's also possible that they were involved, but no one knew about it. Right? Lung asked Silen excitedly. Did you meet quite a few people from those two forces? Silen nodded. But their target wasn't me, so there was no real conflict. In the end, that blue-skinned woman really did want to kill us, but something happened at that time. Someone from the other side probably came over. Strong, right? Very strong. Silen closed his eyes and recalled the situation, briefly explaining what happened. Huimao and the little hellhound also perked up their ears to listen. The two of us couldn't fight against that blue-skinned woman at all, so we could only run. But even that blue-skinned woman was hit in the end, so there was clearly someone stronger. I always thought that I could at least take a few hits, but when I was dragged in from outside the tunnel it didn't feel good. Of course Lung knew what very good meant. He thought that he had escaped the quagmire, but in the next moment he was pulled into an even deeper abyss. Moreover, he was completely defenseless against the mental and physical attack. It's fine, at least you survived. You look pretty good right now, just a little exhausted. Lung nudged Silen with his elbow and said, I'm a lot better now, but a lot of bones in my body were broken, and my internal organs were severely damaged. If I couldn't make it, I would have died. Lung didn't say another word. Maybe his old man didn't expect that Mist and No Pardon would show up at this unexpected place at this time. If he did, his old man would have dragged Lung back and grounded him before he could even say anything. He would have never allowed Lung to mingle in Sector S. If the other forces who had come to Sector S were as strong as Mist and Wuxia people, then what were their chances of returning unscathed? However, even though he knew that there was a huge gap between them, even though he knew that those people were all very powerful, Lung wasn't afraid anymore. 50 years was a generation, and as the representative of this generation, Lung didn't wish for his contact to be too limited to the people and matters around him. He was still young and youth was capital. What he lacked was experience and opportunities. It had to be said that every time he stayed with Silen, he would run into something special. There were so many prison planets in Sector S, and there were even hundreds of Rank 1 prison planets. Yet something happened on this planet. Opportunities. What do you plan to do next, Silen? Lung asked. Silen touched the door beside him. Are you scared? Scared? A little, I guess. But I suddenly feel very excited. Lung rubbed his palms together. Let's go play on a Rank 3 prison planet after we recover. All right. The corner of Silen's mouth pulled up. I'll go with you guys next time. Huimao also said. Silen pinched its ears. I'll bring you guys if there are no special circumstances. When Silen said you guys, it meant that the little hellhound was included. The little fellow seemed to understand and wagged its tail happily. 10 minutes later, Silen crawled out of the hole Huimao made on the door. He had recovered a lot of strength, and walking was not a problem at all. After they found an exit, Lung took out the flying car key and pressed it. The flying car flew over on its own. Sitting on the flying car, Silen suddenly remembered something. He asked, Did you guys find anything unusual when you came over? Lung felt around for a moment and confirmed, Nope. Silen looked at Huimao. Huimao shook his head. I didn't find anything out of the ordinary. The little hellhound's ears drooped. How depressing. He still could not speak. Sillin leaned against the back of the chair. Lung, you should have known that something was wrong with the prisoners in the cells, right? Hearing Sillin say that, Lung really did remember that something was wrong. At the time, he had spent most of his energy on guarding against Fog and Wush's people. Something was wrong. It was as if they had gone mad. At the time, I thought that it was done by one of those two parties, so I didn't think too much about it. It was a type of virus, but those viruses have disappeared now. Could it be that the other party eliminated them? No, those viruses shouldn't be of much use to people of their level, and they wouldn't waste any effort to eliminate them. The survivors of the prison have all escaped, so logically speaking, no one would have the time to fiddle with those things, right? Lung said. It wasn't eliminated by anyone. Sillin rubbed his face. It should have been specially researched by the people who spread the virus. They implanted a programmed death gene into the virus, shortening the time it takes for the virus to die. And it just so happened that most of the viruses died right after they were done. Until now, they can't be found anymore. This incident proved that those people didn't just act on their own, they would also use other means to cause trouble. Although it was only a relatively simple virus this time and wouldn't directly kill them, what about the next time? What would they spread? An assassin who was proficient in viral weapons was even more terrifying. Fortunately, it wasn't a parasite. When Sillin read Komunidin's diary, there was a sentence written by Komunidin with a thick pen. In the near future, parasites will replace viruses and become an even more threatening weapon. Because parasites can not only be carriers of viruses, but they also have intelligence. Forget it, let's not think about it for now. Sillin rubbed his head. It wasn't good to think too much right now, so he should focus on the matter at hand first. When Tsijiu saw Sillin, he was indeed happy. It was rare to be able to come out of that place alive, and it was also a reflection of strength. Tsijiu had always treated people with strength better, not to mention that Sillin Helong had saved his life before. Without saying too much, Sillin Helong and his group prepared to leave on the spaceplane. Forces from various sectors on this planet arrived one after another. Tsijiu was also very busy, while Sillin and the others also had their own plans. But before leaving, Sillin also revealed some information to Tsijiu. Now that he could obtain more information, it would be of great help to Tsijiu's influence in Flying Snake. Lung also intercepted some video clips and sent them to Tsijiu. He patted Tsijiu's shoulder and said with a look that said, "I have faith in you. The sooner you grasp the power in your hands, the sooner you can cooperate with me." Tsijiu raised his eyebrows. Since Lung could say something like this, it meant that this guy's background was pretty deep. He smiled confidently. "Cut the crap and get lost. It'll be hard if you don't get lost now." Once the upper echelons of the various forces arrived, it would really be hard for Sillin and his group to leave. After Sillin and his group's spaceplane left, Tsijiu ordered his subordinates to take care of some matters. If what Sillin Helong said was true, then the information he obtained this time was enough to raise the eyebrows of the upper echelons. No one had a deeper understanding of this matter than those who had personally experienced it, and other than those two forces, those who had such an experience were basically all dead. This also reflected the value of the information Sillin Helong had provided. After returning to the starship, they piloted the starship and left this place, lest they were discovered when too many people arrived later. Sillin lay on the chair and clenched his fist. Although he could clearly feel that the genes in his body had changed, and the helix of his DNA had also changed a little, he really did not discover any special abilities at the moment. However, his physique had become much stronger, and his strength had increased. After eating his fill, Lung began to feel sleepy. This time, he had used up quite a bit of energy, so he had to quickly replenish it. Huimao was squatting at the side teaching the little hellhound how to speak. Right now, the little guy could say some very simple words, but he could not say complete words. Even if he finished speaking, he could not pronounce it accurately. Silen could not help but doubt Huemao's teaching ability. Hulu, you just need to teach him the most basic words. When he knows how to read, let him watch the teaching video himself. The most basic early education, Huimao said proudly. That's good. Silen took out an earphone and put it on the little hellhound, then brought up the basic teaching video for him to watch. The video would teach him the most accurate pronunciation, and connect the background of the video to carry out some intelligent daily conversations. The video Silen chose was quite attractive to the little guy. After watching the video, there was no need for Huimao anymore. Fortunately, Huimao lay on Silen's lap and let Silen scratch his chin. At the same time, he explained in detail what he had encountered in the prison. As he spoke, Silen heard the people beside him start to speak, and then the guide inside said one word at a time. They were all basic words, such as weather words, color words, and some commonly seen items. After the initial awkwardness, the little guy's pronunciation became smoother and smoother. No one knew what he thought of, but the little guy's voice stopped, and he took off the headphones and turned to Silen. Red. Wind. Huemao's ears twitched, and he tilted his head. What do you mean? The little guy pointed at himself and said, Red. Wind, you mean your name is Chiefing? Silen had told the little guy before that he would name himself after learning the language, but he didn't expect him to think of it so quickly. He should have seen the word red in the color words and wind in the weather words. Because the wind was very fast, the little guy thought he could run like the wind. Seeing the little guy nod, Silen walked over and rubbed his head. Okay, from now on, your name is Chiefing. Chapter 175. With regards to Chiefing's problem, Silen still valued it quite a bit. Previously, he had said that he would give Chiefing two choices, a human or a dog. Different choices meant different directions of education and training. Currently, other than his abilities and the innate abilities that came with his genes, Chiefing was practically a blank piece of paper. As for how this blank piece of paper should be developed, Silen would leave the main choice to Chiefing. If Chiefing regretted his decision in the future, he could only blame himself. Only when he personally made the decision would it have any meaning to spur him on. Chiefing learned very quickly on his own. His IQ was there, and the genes that he inherited and the development of his brain had given him quite a bit of talent. This was something that not many people were born with. With a high starting point, even if he started slowly, he would be able to catch up very quickly. Man or dog? Huimao squatted at a high place and looked down at Chiefing, who was talking to the intelligent learning device. Regarding the direction that Chiefing had chosen to develop as a man or a dog, Huimao was actually not very interested. From the perspective of a cyborg, there was no difference between a man or a beast to him. Anyway, as long as he had Silen by his side, it would be fine. As for whether the others were human or beast, or whether they were neither human nor beast, it did not matter to him at all. In fact, previously, Chiefing did not really understand why Silen wanted him to make such a decision. However, after understanding the different life trajectories of humans and dogs, Chiefing resolutely chose a human. Dogs were tamed and loyal, while humans were independent. The reason why Silen had decided to bring Chiefing along was because Chiefing was different from other Cerberus, independent nature, and not stubbornly carrying the twisted responsibility of a guard dog of hell and abiding by it. Although Silen had expected Chiefing to choose a human, when Chiefing had made his decision, he was actually a lot happier. Since Chiefing had chosen human, then the next step would be to teach Chiefing according to the standard of human. Silen told Scarlet Wind to walk on two legs instead of using both hands and feet. He also learned to use his hands when he was eating. Right now, Scarlet Wind wasn't used to using his claws, no, his hands yet. Sometimes, his fingers were too stiff, and while they were agile when tearing prey apart, it was a different story when it came to using tools. In fact, he had even broken a lot of tools due to his poor grasp of strength. However, Silin didn't mind. After so many years, he had to get used to it. Fortunately, Chifeng often saw Silin Hulong's movements and learned quickly. Although he wasn't used to walking on two legs and couldn't run quickly, he could still walk a little. Some of the fur on his body was shaved as well. He couldn't put it on Chifeng before his fur had fully grown. The fur on this little guy's body was too thick. After all, he had canine genes. Although it wasn't as obvious as a real dog, compared to a normal human, the fur was still a little conspicuous. After shaving his face, hands, and other places, he trimmed the tuft of fur on his head and put on his clothes. However, if one ignored his ears that were slightly sharper than a normal person's and that furry tail behind him, he looked no different from a normal child. On this day, after sleeping for a few days, Lung woke up and circled around Chifeng a few times while clicking his tongue. "I really can't believe that the dog from back then still thinks like that," said Lung, who was sitting at the dining table. There was a small dining table with 4 seats. Chifeng used a spoon to dig at the food in his bowl. His long fingernails had long since retracted into his fingers. Together with his grinning child's face, he looked quite harmless. From time to time, Huimao would also grab the grilled fish on the plate with his claws, shoot out his claws and nail them onto the grilled fish like a fork. Then, he would bring the grilled fish to his mouth. After teasing Chifeng for a while, Lung said, "Silin, have you thought about which planet to go to?" Before he went to sleep, Lung told Silin to think about his future itinerary. Since he had decided to go to a rank 3 prison planet, then he had to look for it first. Lung didn't really care which planet he went to, so he directly passed the decision to Silin and flew straight to his destination after he woke up. The reason he chose a rank 3 prison planet was because there were too many forces in this sector. Now that the previous rank 1 prison planet had suffered a devastating blow, the forces in this sector had become even more xenophobic. High-rank prison planets were too difficult, and right now those places were firing points. Many great forces outside of Sector S had their eyes on high-rank prison planet. Conversely, only a rank 3 prison planet was the most suitable for him right now. If he didn't feel satisfied when the time came, then he could try out a high-rank prison planet depending on the situation. However, those places weren't places where he could just cause trouble as he pleased. Bravery didn't mean that he would look for trouble for himself. Since he had to make a choice, Silin didn't like to be too careless. After looking at the star map for a while, he pointed at one of them. That rank 3 prison planet wasn't too far away from where they were right now, and it wasn't the closest rank 1 prison planet to the previous one. After looking at it for a while, Lung also agreed to it. He inputted the coordinates of that rank 3 prison planet into the starship's destination and entered autonomous navigation with the assistance of robots. Now that Lung had another person to talk to, he teased Chifeng like he was teasing a child. Chifeng gave him a lot of face and didn't despise Lung for being too talkative. Before they reached their destination, they received a secret message from the Andriara family. After Lung inputted the decryption program, the message was displayed. Although the Andriara family didn't participate much in the events of the past, a few of their seniors had been sent to that prison even earlier. Therefore, the people they sent this time were mainly responsible for the safety of those family seniors. After all, with the current situation, there was no telling who would take the opportunity to kill them. Even Fog and Wuxia had appeared, and one of the Great Four, Lan Hudi, was ready to make a move. Who wouldn't be cautious? After reading the secret message, Lung let Silin read it as well. It wasn't much of a secret, and it would be helpful to their next operation anyways. A calamity of destruction? Silin murmured after reading it. Lung scratched his head. Isn't that a bit too much? Say, even if those people came to Sector S to save a few people or kill a few people, it still wouldn't cause a calamity to the planet, would it? A calamity of the apocalypse? In fact, most prison planets in Sector S were either rank B or rank C. The higher the level of a prison planet, the lower its livability. As for Sector S's livability planets, most of them were controlled by the various forces of their own sector. But even rank B and rank C livability planets weren't easy to build. Wouldn't it be a pity to destroy them? Scylla sighed. Of course we wouldn't care if it wasn't our planet. It was true that the forces of Sector S were xenophobic not only because they hated the interference of foreign forces, but also because they were worried that the foreign forces would ignore the situation of the sector and destroy some decent planet. After all, it was difficult to even find a rank B livability planet right now. When he recalled what happened on that Grade 1 prison planet, Scylla Helong also fell silent. For some people, destroying a planet was just too easy. Although it was a Grade 1 prison planet, it was destroyed in less than half a day's time. There was no telling if other prison planets would follow in their footsteps. The defense of a Grade 1 prison planet is relatively simple. Fog and Wuxia didn't have to put in much effort. Earlier, they used a virus to create chaos, and the other forces may use similar methods. Scylla said. Just like how Scylla used parasites to almost turn Poison Fang's garrison planet into a graveyard back then, there were just too many ways to destroy a planet and send it into a calamity of the apocalypse. Sometimes people complained about the military and government of the League of Stars, saying that they were too powerful and too hypocritical. But it had to be said that places governed by the military and government of the League of Stars were relatively safer. Unlike Sector S, the military and government of the League of Stars wouldn't say anything if a planet was destroyed. The troublesome ones were the forces of Sector S. Let's pay more attention when we get there. Right now, even a Grade 1 prison planet isn't safe, and the Grade 3 prison planets in the middle might run into some trouble. That's all we can do. We're not going to give up, are we? Lung yawned and went to the equipment room to prepare some stuff. He had to make more preparations this time, or he would be too passive if something happened. When they were about to reach their destination planet, Scylla hesitated whether he should bring Chiefing with him. After all, Huimao had made up his mind to tag along and leave Chiefing alone on the starship. The little guy always looked unhappy and looked at Scylla Helong pitifully all day long. He would even whimper and pretend to be pitiful. Then let's bring him. Huimao licked his paws and wiped his face. It's not like he's weak. Lung also agreed to bring Chiefing with him. Even if he didn't move with them, he might be of help with his beast talent. It didn't take long before Scylla breathed a sigh of relief. The Grade 3 prison planet Scylla had chosen was coincidentally the planet Guade I Ling had stayed on. 6 hours ago, according to the ephemeris, inside the prison of this Grade 3 prison planet. Due to the major incident that had happened on a certain Grade 1 prison planet, all the prisons had strengthened their security. The frequency of patrolling by the prison guards increased, and the defense systems, especially the weapons systems, were checked every once in a while to prevent them from being infiltrated without knowing it. Because the management of Grade 3 prisons was not as loose as Grade 1 prisons, the prisoners basically didn't even leave their cells, and there were no chaotic situations such as gathering together to fight. What made the prison guards relieved was that the prison had been very peaceful recently. Apart from the rising tension of the prison guards, there were no unusual signs in the prison. But it was too early to be relieved. Some of the prisoners were a little restless. Although there were usually quite a few prisoners who went crazy, they were not too conspicuous among these crazy prisoners. Some of the prisoners began to feel nauseous and vomit, and some of them even fainted. Some of the prisoners noticed that their limbs were heavy, and their muscles were atrophied and weak, even paralyzed. Some of them noticed that their vision had decreased, and their joints were sore, swollen, and tender. One of the prisoners suddenly noticed that there were some abnormal, uneven scars on his face when he was rubbing his face, and the area of the scars was still expanding. Some of the prisoners anxiously scratched their heads and found that they were pulling out bunches of their own hair. Even their eyebrows and beards began to fall off. The sudden great panic caused the emotions that the prisoners had suppressed for many years to explode. One by one, they began to pound the walls and scream in despair. Even though they were separated by cells, they could feel the restlessness of the prisoners around them. In fact, not only the prisoners, but some of the prison guards were also experiencing the same situation. Because they had made various preparations beforehand, the prison guards quickly began to take measures as soon as such a situation occurred. They were able to prevent the virus, but not the radioactive material. When did the radioactive material get in? Why didn't the prison's radiation detectors warn them? The prison guards were busy trying to save themselves and check the defense system. The prisoners were wailing in their cells. However, Guadai-Shirsi didn't have that much time to play with the prisoners. After he noticed that something was wrong, he took out the thing that Guadai-Ling had left for him and opened the cell door. Guadai-Shirsi was the big man with a scruffy beard. The reaction around him was different from what Guadai-Ling had said. It had been brought forward by a day. In that case, it wasn't Lon Hudi who did this, but someone else. Ghost Butterfly 14 did not want to stay here any longer. The radioactive substances did not have much of an effect on him for the time being. He had not wasted any time during his years in prison, and his strength had improved a lot. He was much stronger than before. The people who came out of prison were not only Guadai-Shirsi and the others from Lon Hudi. There were also people from other forces. Obviously, some people had secretly taken action during this period. In order to create chaos and escape, the people who came out of prison released the other prisoners. 14. Hurry up and find 17. Things have changed. I don't know if anything happened to her. There's more and more radioactive material. Leave now. One of them said. Got it. You guys go first. I'll go after her immediately, Guadai-Shirsi said as he came to a cell and opened the door. The person in the cell was reading the newspaper and sitting peacefully in a chair. He wasn't affected by what was happening outside. He didn't panic because of the radioactive material either. He still exuded an academic aura and looked gentle and cultured. When Guadai-Shirsi opened the cell door, Gaydar didn't look up at him. Guadai-Shirsi didn't show any dissatisfaction because of Gaydar's cold and indifferent reaction. Instead, he bowed to Gaydar as a junior. Many people bowed to Gaydar when they saw him. Even Guadai-Ling had to take the initiative to greet him as a sign of respect. After bowing, Guadai-Shirsi left and moved with his companions. After Guadai-Shirsi left, a few crazy prisoners came in. These prisoners had almost lost their self-awareness. They were no different from lunatics. After these crazy prisoners entered Gaydar's cell, they jumped at Gaydar with cruel smiles. The two prisoners who came in directly fell to the ground. They didn't have any wounds, but if someone came to examine them, they would find that their hearts were broken. Throughout the whole process, Gaydar's actions didn't change. He drank the water in the cup and put down the teacup. The old newspaper in his hand flashed with old images from more than 10 years ago. After neatly folding the old newspaper and putting it on the table, Gaydar patted his pants and slowly walked out of the cell. The prisoners crowded around him were forcibly pushed away by a force. Those who were too persistent were directly obliterated. The cell's defense system had been paralyzed. Although the prison guards and technicians tried their best to stop it, it was still in vain. The surrounding surveillance cameras didn't need Gaydar to deal with them. They were already useless. Before walking out of the cell, Gaydar looked at a corner. There was an invisible person there, but it wasn't Guadai-Ling. When the man saw Gaydar looking over, he expressed that he didn't mean to offend him. His whole body tensed up. He was a little shocked when he saw Gaydar just now, but he couldn't care less now. He hurriedly made his stance clear. Gaydar was in a good mood, so he ignored him and walked out of the cell. Interesting, these fellows who had been dormant for many years have come out. The prison guards were busy dealing with the escaped prisoners. They had made preparations beforehand, so they weren't completely powerless. Explosions came from many parts of the prison. The prisoners of a level 3 prison weren't completely fearless against bullets, and many of them had already died on the ground. When Scylla and the others arrived at the vicinity of their destination planet, they discovered that something was wrong with the planet. It seemed like there was a problem with the orbiting satellites as well. At the very least, after Lung tried to send out a signal, there was no response. "What do we do? It seems that the riot inside has begun," Lung said. Before he came to Sector S, Lung had been preparing to cause some disturbance. But after he arrived, he discovered that he didn't need to do anything at all. Someone smarter had already done it in advance. Scylla didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the satellites orbiting the planet. He couldn't help but feel that something was going to happen on these satellites. Lung brought up the detection device and scan image. The energy waves on the planet were already very wide, and it wasn't just inside the prison. There were energy waves outside the prison as well, and there were a lot of crossfire going on. The escaped prisoners were also in conflict with each other, so it wasn't unusual for them to take out a thorn in their side. Looking at the image on the screen, and just as Lung was about to say something, Scylla pointed at the satellites outside. A few smaller satellites were separated from the satellite. Scylla knew that these satellites would fly to various parts of the planet and form a huge network of defense and attack at specific locations and angles. It was the microsatellite array. It looked like the prison's administrators were desperate. A network like this would cause a lot of damage to the prison, and they wouldn't activate it unless they were forced to a certain extent. It wasn't that the surveillance device didn't respond to Lung's unfamiliar signal, it was that they didn't have the time to do so. Right now, the people controlling the microsatellite array should be their top priority. However, before these microsatellite arrays could come into play, the mother satellites suddenly shot out rays of white light. Then, the white light swept across the microsatellite. There was a brilliant explosion. All the microsatellites were blasted to smithereens. "That's..." Lung's mouth fell open. "What's that?" "I don't know," Scylla said, "but the planet's external defenses are gone now. Some devices were installed on the mother satellite." However, this was the first time Scylla had seen a microsatellite array destroyed in one go. Just which force had developed such technology? "Do you want to go down and take a look?" Scylla said. Now that the planet was in chaos, it would be easier to break in. "Of course. Let's teleport to a fixed point." "All right."